Good evening and welcome to the Town of Milton Planning Board meeting. This is the sixth meeting of fiscal year 2020. I think we can introduce ourselves. My name is April Anderson. I'm the chair of the board. Denny?
Denny Swenson, member and secretary.
Cheryl?
Cheryl Tagayas, member.
Kathleen?
Kathleen O'Donnell, member.
Richard?
Feeler, member.
Tim?
Tim Zerwinski, Director of Planning and Community Development.
Allison?
Allison Quinn, assistant planner.
And Julia.
Julia Getman, clerk.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Next meeting date for the Milton Planning Board will be Thursday, November 12th. Does this work for all of the members? The regular scheduled meeting.
We need to talk.
Sorry,
I'm
Tim.
sorry.
Oh, I have to attend a meeting in another community for work on the 12th. So similar to our last meeting, I can join when that's done.
Okay.
We do need to talk about the second meeting of November, which would be Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, yes. So what do we have on the docket for November, Tim? We have zoning articles. We have comments on 40B projects.
Yeah. So are you talking about November 12th?
Just the month of November. What are you anticipating?
So I am anticipating a continued conversation about the zoning articles for the meeting on the 12th. I think at the very that would be, I think, the very latest to finalize any comments on the two project eligibility letters for the 40B projects. We do have a couple of site plan approval applications that are in process that we've been reviewing. So that that may make the cut for November 12th, one of them, but probably definitely at least one of them, if not both, for a second November meeting if we were to have one.
Okay, so how does the 19th of November look for all the members? In lieu of the 26th, which is Thanksgiving evening.
Yeah, I prefer the 19th.
Yeah. You'll be sleeping by 7 on Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah, I hope so.
19th is fine for me.
Okay.
That's fine.
Rich?
Yes.
Okay, so let's officially schedule our meetings in November for November 12th. And Cheryl will join when she can, and November 19th. And that way, Cheryl, if there's something on the agenda on the 12th that's of importance to you that you don't think you're going to make, we can either move it to the end of the meeting or we can move it to the 19th, just the next
Okay.
one.
All right.
Actually, sorry. Oh, did you say the 19th of November?
Yes.
That is East Milton Working Group is having a meeting that day, I believe.
Okay.
And so,
How
I
about the
mean,
18th?
I'm sorry.
How's the 18th look?
Oh, fine.
Okay.
The 18th works for me.
Kathleen?
Let me see. Yeah.
Okay.
I think the select board meets on the 18th, but that's not a problem for the school committee. So we can all just have our meetings on the 18th.
Yep. And if in Milton Access TV can only, do one live, that's fine. People can just watch us. Tune in later for all the big planning board news. Okay, so then we're scheduled for the 12th and the 18th. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Denny, do you have?
Well, I did not see any amendments and they looked fine to me. So I move to approve.
No, I have one typo.
Oh, okay.
Camposi does not have a Z, it's an S.
Ooh, good catch. Wow. With that amendment. And then there was one thing. Is Novell coronavirus, is Novell capitalized? I don't know. I'll leave that to Julia. But with those as amended by Kathleen, and if Julia could just check, it's probably fine. I move to approve October 8th, 2020 minutes.
Second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? No, we'll do a roll call vote. Kathleen O'Donnell,
Yes.
Denny Swenson,
Yes.
Rich Beeler,
Yes.
Cheryl Tagayas.
Yes.
Burley Anderson, yes. Okay.
Excuse me,
Yes, Julia.
April, there's
Yeah.
a set of There was a set of minutes from September before the 8th, which I think was the 24th of September, that haven't been approved.
That's right. We
Oh,
deferred
okay.
them last time. Did you have a chance to review those, Denny?
Yes, I did. So I move to approve the September 4th as amended. September 4th, 24th, 2020 as amended. All in favor?
Second.
Okay.
Kathleen's quicker than anybody.
Anybody have any discussion? If
I
not,
think we already had, we had made the comments, I think, already. In that, I think we were just waiting on a final run through, so.
I didn't
Yeah.
get any comments.
Oh,
I didn't have any.
okay. So there weren't any amendments. It was just as is?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah, I reviewed them and I didn't have any comment.
okay.
Okay. So then we have a motion, no discussion, and let's go to a roll call vote. Cheryl Tagayas,
Yes.
Denny Swenson,
Yes,
Rich Beeler,
Yes.
Kathleen O'Donnell,
Yes.
April Anderson, yes. Okay. And I forgot to make our little announcement at the beginning of the meeting that in accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law relating to the 2020 novel coronavirus outbreak emergency, this meeting of the Milton Planning Board is to be held remotely utilizing the Zoom meeting software format. The login and call-in information is available on the agenda that's posted on the town website. And the meeting is being televised live via Milton Access Television. Riveting TV. So now we'll move on to Tim, who will give us a staff update, please.
Excuse me. We've been working very hard. Although I only have 3 items on my list, so I can assure you we're working very hard on them. I had emailed the board yesterday. If you remember when I wasn't around, but I think you all were, when the first set of 40B project eligibility letters came around, there were site visits to all the various sites. This was in a pre-COVID era. Where we could go outside and gather together, and there weren't really concerns at that point about pandemics. It's a different world now, and we still have these applications, and we still are interested in looking at the sites to inform our comments. And so I had emailed around a site visit scheduled for next Wednesday for 936 Brush Hill Road and 16 Amer Road. Because of various reasons, liability, public health, there's currently tenants at 936 Brush Hill Road that the upshot is that we can't have a public meeting as this site visit. Typically, we would prefer to do it that way. Post it on the public calendar, and, it's a public meeting and there can be deliberation because it's publicly posted. Because the property owner is hesitant to allow members of the public, and especially members of the public in the numbers that we anticipate based on the interest that we've had in these projects, we're not legally able to post this as a public meeting. And so what we need to do is, in the interest of transparency, I'm talking about the planning board is going to be visiting these sites as part of their review of these applications. Typically, Mass Housing would organize this and we'd all go together. But they've changed their policy on that sort of thing, for public health reasons. But it's not going to be a public meeting. It's not going to be posted publicly on the calendar. And as a result, in order to be in compliance with the open meeting law, there are special, they call them exemptions, but they're not really exemptions. A quorum of the board is allowed to visit a site and inspect the site as long as no deliberations occur and no questions are asked. Everyone acknowledges the difficulty in actually pulling that off. And so what we'd like to be able to do is give everyone an opportunity to visit the site, do whatever inspection they feel they need in order to formulate comments outside the context of a quorum. So consequently, this is all a lead up to, we're actually going to be going in 2 shifts. I'll send an email to follow up on this tomorrow morning, but on Wednesday, November 4th, an 11 a.m. shift and then a 12:30 shift. Again, I'll email this in the morning. What I'd like to be able to do is sort of divide everyone up so that there's not a quorum. And then we don't have to be concerned with any sort of open meeting implications. I think, it's probably still best to, not do a ton of chatting, just so that we're all above board. And just to also, the emails that I sent the other day included some guidance from town council, I think outlining all of these issues. So he's kind of been, at our side and kind of figuring out how to actually navigate this situation. So I'll shoot an email out tomorrow and we can figure out, who can go on what shift, and we can get that site visit in. So, again, we're not interested in, this isn't a secret. We're not interested in kind of shutting people out, but it's we can't legally have a public meeting and then have people not allowed to be on the site, standing on the curb on Brush Hill Road. And so, for everyone, the planning board will be out there, and that's what you'll be up to on Wednesday.
Tim, if I can just jump in for a second, just to remind the board, a quorum for us is 3 people. So if we do 2 shifts, it would have to be 2 and 2. And when I spoke with Tim earlier about this, I'm happy to volunteer. If everybody's available on that day and wants to go, I'm happy to set up my own tour at another time so that everybody can go. If people aren't available, I'll take whatever slot is left. So it's up to you guys to schedule your time first. Go ahead, Tim.
So we'll figure that out tomorrow or the coming days. The other thing, you may have read about this in the newspaper. I think it was in the Milton Times last week. But there is a potential new tenant for the restaurant space at 88 Wharf. And they're actually in front of the select board, I think next week, for some licensing issues. I've been working with our licensing manager to figure out what other needs this potential tenant has in terms of their space, and I have to do another review of the special permit, but there may need to be an amendment of the special permit for that space based on some interior changes that they're making. That's literally all the details I have now. I haven't had a chance to look through what they're proposing and what the implications are for the special permit, but that's something that may potentially be coming down the pike. It's a very exciting opportunity. This is a restaurant group that has a bunch of really popular downtown restaurants. It looks like they've got a really cool concept. And I think, given all the work that we've done in Milton Village, I think they'd be a really good fit. And, we should, do our best to figure out how to accommodate what they're trying to do. But I'll have, again, more details about that after I have a chance to review the special permit. And then I alluded to this earlier when we were talking about scheduling, but we've been doing a technical review on a site plan approval application at 584 Randolph Avenue. That's on the corner of Randolph and Reedsdale. There's an existing single-family house proposal to do an addition and convert that into a funeral home. So that's gone through our technical review. The only thing that I'm waiting on is to hook up with a peer review engineering firm and get that going. But I think they're otherwise ready to at least have an initial public hearing, and you all can have a chance to take a look at that. So again, that may not be ready for November 12th, but it may be ready for a later November meeting. And then we've also gotten a site plan approval application from Winter Valley. They have a parcel of land that, when that development was first put together, had a deed restriction on it for, I think, Allison, correct me, 30 years.
Correct.
And after 30 years, there's the opportunity to put additional units on that parcel. So that deed restriction expired, I believe, last year. And so they've been looking at some expansion. So that's a little bit more early days. We just have the application in. I've got to kind of walk them through what materials they need to put together. But that's another thing that'll be coming before the board. That's one of the, we've done this before in the past. That requires zoning relief from the Board of Appeals and also site plan approval from the Planning Board. Those can happen simultaneously or on parallel tracks. Doesn't have to be sequential. But we will want to keep an eye on what the Board of Appeals is up to when that eventually gets there. They've gotten their rejection letter from the building commissioner. So that's kind of in that process at the Board of Appeals. So
Excuse
those are a
me.
couple.
Excuse
Yep.
me, may I ask a question? Is the Board of Appeal apt to take up that type of application, given their not taking up the 40B applications to date?
So when I say we want to keep an eye on what the Board of Appeals is up to in this case, I think that's exactly kind of what I'm talking about. Whether or not they want to even open up that hearing or take some other type of action or recommend some other course of action. So at the very least, like I said, it's early days, so I'm going to have them prepare their materials. And if it turns out that I don't know if we want to get so far ahead of the Board of Appeals that we're, making a site plan approval contingent upon a hearing that who knows when it'll happen at the Board of Appeals. But, we can at least get them started on getting their materials together. So, that may be coming. It may not be coming. But, we'll be in touch with the Board of Appeals on that one. And that's all I've got. I don't know if Allison, if I missed anything that we've been up to.
The budget.
I think you've covered everything that's relative for right now. As a staff, Tim has been working hard on kind of centralizing all of the feedback that he's been getting related to the ongoing 40B saga from the existing applicants and the two that are now awaiting the PEL. And on the flip side of that, I've been trying to identify alternative legislation that can help offer some kind of guidance to us as a planning department as related to the 40Bs. So that's what we've really been up to.
Yeah, I think, thank you for bringing that up, Allison. Allison's been working very hard on figuring out different paths to safe harbor through our housing production plan, which we can talk about a little bit more later. April, I know you said the budget. We actually have an agenda item under new business about the budget, so we can start with that, or we can wait until after some of the other new business items.
That's not on my agenda.
Yeah, we updated it. It's on the one that's on the public calendar. I apologize. I should have put that in the folder. That's the only change. There's a new business item for budget.
Okay, then let's move on to citizen speak. At this point in the meeting, any member of the public who wishes to address the board on an item that is not on our agenda tonight is free to do so. We've had our last meeting, we had quite a few folks that want us to talk about 40B projects, and we have 5 on our agenda tonight. 582 Blue Hill Ave, 648 Canton Ave, 487 Blue Hills Parkway, 16 Ammer Road, 936 Brush Hill Road. So if you are calling in on any of those projects, I would ask you to please hold your comment until we get to that part of the agenda. But if you have other things you would like to address the board on, please raise your hand. Is there a raise hand function in this new?
There should be a raise hand function. I talked about this a little bit earlier, and if there's any new folks that have joined us, we're using the webinar function for Zoom as opposed to the traditional Zoom meeting. So the analogy I use is the folks you see on camera right now, myself, the board, and some staff members. Consider us to be sort of at the front of the room, and you folks are in the seats. And so there should be a raise hand function. If you do want to speak, if you just press it, there'll be a little hand that comes up next to your name on our list. And April will call on you in order and enable you to talk and turn your camera on if that's something that you're interested in.
So I don't see anyone with the hand raised. Tim, do you?
I do not.
Okay. All right, then let's move on with our agenda. And if at some point somebody has been trying to raise their hand and can't, just do so as you can, and I'll try to monitor the attendees list. So the first item on our agenda is the 3 projects that have submitted applications. These projects will be going before the Zoning Board of Appeals. of course, that hearing has not yet been scheduled, so we don't have a deadline on this, but we wanted to start compiling feedback on the applications from the board members in order to inform our letters, our comment letters to the ZBA. So I know Tim had circulated the link to the applications and asked for feedback if anyone had them, and I don't think you got any feedback. Is that right, Tim?
That's right. And April, just let me, I mean, this is all predicated on if the planning board is interested in submitting written testimony to the Board of Appeals. If you're not, we can move on. I suspect maybe you might be interested.
Yes. Cheryl?
Yeah, I took a quick look. I did have a conversation with Tim and told him that my time to dedicate to certain aspects of this agenda tonight, I shifted priority to the condo conversion discussion. But I do want to take this up at another meeting. At least the 580, you mentioned 582 Blue Hill Ave, 648 Canton Ave, and what was the third one?
487
487 Blue Hill.
Oh, the Parkway. All right. Okay. So I took a quick look at 648 and 582. So Canton Ave and Blue Hill Ave. You may recall that right before we submitted our comments, the applicant revised their applications to Mass Housing, and our letters didn't respond to those necessarily because we didn't really have adequate time to do that. So I wanted to take a quick look at those and see what they changed. I just want to point out for everyone on the board and maybe the public who wants to delve into the ZBA website. They have it, the application in multiple folders, and they have a set that's called the architectural set. And in the architectural set, let's go with 648 first, they have changed the massing and they have changed the footprint. And so I do want to take the look at those before we, and I would like for us to consider revised comments as a result of that, because I don't think it would help the ZBA as much if we just regurgitated comments on a scheme that's different. And another thing I noticed about that is that they removed the parking lot that was shown closer to Canton Avenue. And that was a significant item of concern, I think, in our original application as well. So I do encourage everyone to take a look at that, and I will myself further as well. On the 582 Blue Hill Ave, we looked at those big retaining walls that they had, particularly in the back that faced Meeting House Lane, and the scale impact that those are going to have. They have revised that design to remove some of those retaining walls. So again, I think these are, let me just preface this both by saying, these are still huge buildings, right? So these changes I consider to be minor relative to the overall scale of these structures. But I still think we should provide our feedback based on these revised schemes. And then the Parkway, you know, that the same thing there. They've been that's actually had quite a significant change, where I do think that they've considered our comments carefully, and so we should all take a careful look at that.
Great. So I agree with you, Cheryl. I think we should talk, continue to evaluate the applications and talk more about it on an upcoming agenda.
Yeah, but I don't think that since they haven't opened the hearings yet,
Right.
and we don't know what is going to be what's different, what are they going to show up with at the actual hearing, that might be different. So that I don't see a real compelling need to send something in ahead of time. I'd like to see what happens when they open the hearings.
So Kathleen, they're going to use to suspect that they'll come in with something different than what they've submitted to the ZBA already?
Who knows? You know, that's happened before, you know, in my experience, and not significantly different, but different in a way, within the general parameters. I mean, you know, it's a moving target about, you know, the timing on all this sort of stuff. And so as I said, I don't see a compelling need to have us have a letter into the ZBA when they open the hearing. I think till they open the hearing.
I agree. I do think we should sort of tee one up based on what the information that we have now and some of the discussions that need to be had based on the changes. But I agree. I mean, I think we need to remain flexible because they might not open their hearing for 6 months, and who knows what happens between now and then. Okay, so Rich and Denny, do you have anything more to add to this at this point?
No, I agree with all those points. I think that's a good plan. Thank you.
Okay. Rich,
Yep.
anything?
Nothing further.
Okay, so if there's any members of the public, this isn't a public hearing, so we don't technically have to hear from anybody, but I want to acknowledge the folks that have taken the time to dial in. So if there's anybody that is dialed in on any of these three projects who would like to make a couple of moments of comment, we would welcome that. So again, if you could use the raise hand function to do that, if you're interested, and we'll wait just a moment here to see if any of our attendees are interested in talking. And I don't see any hands raised. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next item on our agenda. These are two new applications for site eligibility. So these are the first time that this board is talking about these two projects. One is 16 Amber Road and one is 936 Brush Hill Road. Tim, do you want to give us a quick summary of what we need to do in order to be responsive to the select?
April, we've got a hand up that went up.
That's Ned. Okay. Why don't you explain to us first what you're hearing on timing and the deadline and why that's important for us to have this conversation this evening?
Yeah. So the way that this process typically works is an applicant will, and this is the process that we went through, for the three applications we were just talking about. You apply to mass housing for site eligibility. You have a month. Everyone has a month to sort of put comments together and send them to mass housing, and then mass housing takes those into consideration in determining. There's a number of statutory findings that they need to find in order to determine that a site is eligible for a comprehensive permit project. And they solicit the town's comments. They ask the town to put together comments, based on the factors that they need to, do findings on. I mentioned earlier the different sort of changes that have occurred as a result of the public health emergency. One thing that mass housing has afforded to us is a month extension of that deadline. So that deadline for comments was initially going to be November 9th. It's now December 9th. Which is very nice. It gives us a little bit more time to visit the site and chat. But the select board has tasked me with sort of putting together a first draft of the town's comments for them to consider and put their own select spin on, as it were, in terms of speaking for the town. And they would like to consider that draft at their, I mentioned it earlier, their November 18th or 19th meeting. And so, it would give us, still plenty of time before that December 9th deadline, but, it is coming up. And so, given the fact that the board is not meeting again until the 12th, it would really be helpful if we have a good and robust discussion tonight and be in a position to have a draft of comments that I can synthesize into a broader comment letter for the select board. I'd like to be able to have that done to the select board by, I'm looking at the calendar, very spooky Friday the 13th of November, to send that draft to them. So, I mean, it would kind of need to be done, from this board by, I would hope, the 9th. And so, given the fact that there's no meeting between here and then, we should think about how we want to get that done. But that would be, a standalone letter from the planning board. It can be on planning board letterhead. It can be whatever. But I would sort of be taking that and synthesizing those comments with other boards and commissions and town department comments for the select board to eventually, put together a final letter.
So you don't feel as though we'll be able to discuss it again at November 12th?
I'm
thinking, Tim, because we'll get a draft, and I just think people might, and this board might feel comfortable being able to talk about it in a public meeting.
Yeah, I don't think that's totally out of the realm of possibility. What I would hope is that the draft is kind of mostly done, so that it's not something that I'm scrambling the morning of Friday the 13th to put it together. So I think if we can have a draft letter and then put the finishing touches on it on the 12th, I think that's probably fine. You know, and I think, you know, given the scope of these projects, I think, you know, the broad strokes of what the board is trying to get at, I think we can, you know, get a feel for that tonight. But yeah, I think, you know, putting a bow on it on the 12th should be okay.
Okay. Okay. So
I've looked at the applications for both of them, not all the way through, you know, with a really fine tooth comb, but you know, the density is unbelievable. I mean, because especially on the one on Brush Hill Road, how many units they want to put on something that's, you know, really tiny spot. It's just amazing. A lot of stuff shoehorned into one. It's very small spot. So
Can we pull the plans up on the screen? Or
Is there one that you want to do first?
yeah, let's start with Amber Road. Amber
Okay.
Road. And what I was going to propose, we have a couple of hands raised. Maybe we can invite folks for comment, and then we have a discussion. Does that work, board?
yeah, and then as I said, I'll make notes and take a look at our draft letters the last time and.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is my best shot here. I think they're showing up in sequence. And I don't believe I'm a host of this meeting, Tim, so I think you might have to recognize people. And, oh. Do I have to promote them to panelist?
No, you should be. Is it possible to make April a host so she can allow folks to talk?
I can.
I just made her co-host. Yes.
Yeah. So if you hover over someone's name, there's the allow to talk button.
So what I would ask, just to remind the public or to introduce you to the process if you haven't participated, is when we recognize you, please state your name and address, and then your comment. So the first person we have here is our frequent flyer. So I know he knows the process, Ned Corcoran. Ned.
All right.
I don't know if we're going to be able to see you, Ned. I don't know if you have your video on.
I do, but I don't know whether it works in this format.
Okay.
I don't think it does.
It probably doesn't matter.
Yeah. But thank you, Ned Corcoran, attorney here in Milton. And I see Bob Galvin is also on representing the Brush Hill Road neighborhood, but I am retained by the neighbors of 16 Amor Road to represent them relative to their concerns and opposition to this proposed 40B development. I'm sort of breaking out in hives. It's the first time I've ever represented an opposition group to development in all of my professional experience. And so it's a little bit of a different place to be. But I think in this case, it's appropriate because unlike most of the projects that I have tried to bring forward in the past, they didn't start with conversations with the neighborhood. They didn't start with conversations with the town, didn't try to find some level of consensus about what might go there, understanding that what's being proposed might be more than would generally be acceptable in the first instance, but you try to work the process and arrive at a reasonable outcome, and that didn't happen in this case, and it hasn't happened with respect to any of the 4 projects that this developer has proposed in the town. And so I just think that in that regard, there is a reasonable course that should be taken relative to how you pursue development, and understanding that 40B has its own history and its own process, but I still think there are appropriate ways to go about doing that. A quick overview. I know you don't have a plan up, but this is a slightly less than 1 acre lot. Property was purchased earlier this year out of foreclosure. They got it pretty cheap. I think they've got somebody with their eyeballs on Milton looking for property that becomes available, and they're grabbing if they can at a reasonable price. And they bought the Brush Hill Road property the same day with consecutive deeds filed with the Norfolk County Registry of Deeds. This is a 1 acre lot at the corner of Amor Road at Brush Hill Road and Truman Highway. I took a ride over there on Saturday. I walked the neighborhood. It is a disaster of a location to think about adding density relative to the corner lot location and the proposed location of driveways. From a density perspective, you're going from a single family to 6 buildings containing a total of 16 units. There are 4 single family units that would front on Amor Road. And there are 12 units in 2 buildings on the property line, sort of creating a wall, if you will, about 200 feet in length with a single break in the middle, hovering over a single family dwelling on the other side. And between the 4 buildings that front on Amor Road and the 2 long 12-unit multifamily units to the rear is a 22 space parking lot. Instead of a single driveway accessing Amor Road approximately 150 feet above the intersection with Brush Hill Road, they now introduce 4 separate driveways with 2 parking spaces for each, 1 a garage lot parking spot and an outdoor parking spot. So you've got now significant new traffic conflict in 4 locations proximate to the intersection. And worse, you're introducing a single access point for 22 vehicles feet from a fairly significant and dangerous intersection. I emailed Tim today a draft set of formal comments that I prepared to deliver to the select board on behalf of the neighborhood with Google Earth images of the intersection, but that is an unsignalized intersection where Truman Highway, a two lane in each divided roadway, 2 lanes in each direction, with a parking lane on the Amor Road side, merges into Brush Hill Road. Brush Hill Road comes down the hill from the south to a stop sign at this wide intersection. Then just beyond the intersection with Amor Road, they propose to introduce a new driveway entry for 22 vehicles that would require a right turnout only, with no direct access to either Brush Hill Road southbound or Truman Highway southbound or Amor Road in particular. You would all of a sudden be, if you were taking that direction to take Truman Highway to the south, you pull out, cross 2 lane traffic and do an immediate U-turn back southerly on Brush Hill Road. There's also poor signage and poor visibility for vehicles coming southbound on Brush Hill Road and turning left to head up onto Brush Hill Road or turning further left to go to Amor Road. And you can see how people coming to that parking lot would also be pulling a U-turn to come around from Brush Hill Road southbound to Brush Hill Road northbound to make that change. I think safety is a significant issue. I understand there's a significant issue of traffic accidents with several fatalities over the last few years. I've suggested to Tim that the police department should pull all of their records, accident records, and that showing the incidents of accidents, particularly serious accidents at location, should be something that would give the state pause in terms of how they might look at it. The last point that I would make that I think is an interesting point. It's not one that I've heard before, but it's one that one of the abutters raised the other night, and we thought about it. And that is that there's no real green space on this property. You have you're clear cutting a rectangular piece of property that currently has lots of trees, lots of lawn, and replacing it with a retaining wall, 6 buildings, and a parking lot, showing a little bit of green space around the edges. But there's no place, if you're inviting 16 families, particularly in the single family units, to come to this property, no place for the children to play. No green space. And there are no parks nearby. The school, Tucker School, is a good mile away. There's no place nearby for children to play. That creates somewhat of an equity issue for the people who would be invited to live here, because they're surrounded by single-family house lots with nice big yards and areas, but there's nothing available. There's no amenity like that here. And so I think that is an interesting issue that I don't often see in these cases, but most of the projects that I work on, how you develop the land and how you create space is an important component of how good development comes forward. And I know that that's been a very important issue for the planning board over time relative to site development and whatnot. The last thing I would say is that the development is, although they say it is accessible to transit, it really is not. It's at least 1.5 miles in each direction to a transit station. It's not a convenient walk. There are no other amenities nearby. It's not walkable. One of the reasons why I would suggest there are 30 parking spaces suggested for 16 units is that they know people need cars to and from. So I think they're introducing too much volume, too many vehicles, too much. It's too much of a clear cut of the property, and there's very little room left for what you might do. And so, as I said, I submitted to Tim a draft set of comments that will formalize that you can use more specifically, but I thought it'd be important at least to highlight the issues that have been raised on behalf of the other residents of the Amor Road area. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ned. I just want to confirm that Tim did circulate the comments, so the board does have them, so thank you. The next person who raised their hand is Lori McIntosh. Lori, if you would please just confirm your name and address and then offer some comments.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yep.
I'm unmuted. Okay, good. I'm Laurie McIntosh. I live at 77 Cushing Road, and I am president of the Cushing Road Neighborhood Association. And I am speaking on behalf of 14 residents of Cushing Road, and this is regarding 936 Brush Hill Road. I would like to just say about Ned's comments that the developer is doing exactly the same thing at this lot, which is slightly less than an acre, as they are doing down there on Amor Road, essentially paving over or building end to end, lot line to lot line. They will clear cut, and they have no, and there is no green space. So I'm just going to read some comments here that I also shared with the select board at their previous meeting, and then I can send you this in email afterwards.
Great,
Our feeling is that this project will severely impact the residents of Cushing Road. It is totally out of character with the neighborhood. If built, it will make our street more dangerous. It will create traffic and trash. It will be an eyesore. It will destroy the wooded atmosphere of Brush Hill Road by building and paving over almost a complete acre of residential green space. And it will put an additional burden on town services, schools, DPW, police and fire, etc. Cushing Road residents will be the most impacted by this development. We will experience most, if not all, of the additional traffic created from 20 family units and their friends living 100 yards from the entrance to our street, going to Stop and Shop, Walgreens, the package store, the bank, et cetera, and Dedham and Route 1. We're the cut through to all of those places. This additional traffic will make our street less safe for the 12 school-age children that live and play on our road now. Drivers already speed here. These apartment buildings could add hundreds of dangerous trips per day up and down our street. And that's not an exaggeration, because I took a look at the Federal Highway Administration's statistics. They say that the average household makes 9.5 trips per day. And that would be 18 trips, 19 really, in our case, because going is one half of the trip and coming back down Cushing Road's the other half. And so by doing the math, 20 households times 9.5 trips per day equals 190 trips times 2 is 380 additional cars going up and down Cushing Road. The design of this complex is also a complete eyesore. built right to the street with a retaining wall and as close as possible to the property lines on both sides. The two buildings look like massive bunkers plopped down into fields and woods. Their presence and the glaring lights around the two buildings and the parking lot in between will completely destroy the woodland feel of our neighborhood. It'll look like a tea station in the middle of residential housing. If built, this complex will further strain our town resources, adding children to our schools, requiring additional trash and recycle services from the DPW, adding cars to also already dangerous nearby intersections, for example, Brush Hill Road, Milton Street, and the Ponce Valley Parkway, another one of those triangulated areas where it's very dangerous, thus involving the Milton Police, and adding two massive structures to the responsibilities of our firefighters. Over the last 5 years, CRNA, the Cushing Road Neighborhood Association, has worked tirelessly with the Milton Police, the Boston Police, Eversource, and the St. Pius Church to improve the safety and visibility in our area surrounding Cushing Road. Adding this densely located additional residence to the base of our street could reverse our gains, putting the progress into jeopardy. We do not, nor does the town, want the drug deals, the underage drinking, the break-ins, and the dangerous nighttime behavior to resume in our area. So in conclusion, along with the abutting neighbors on Brush Hill Road, we on Cushing Road will experience the greatest impact from this development, and ultimately it could affect our property values. And as I said, I speak for 14 residents of 7 homes on Cushing Road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lori. I appreciate your time and for coming before us tonight.
April, can I chime in real quick?
Please.
A couple things, and I want to make sure that we are being respectful in our comments. One thing is that the Milton Public Schools are obligated to educate the children of Milton. It's a responsibility of the town to accommodate the children that live in the town. And it's not in the purview of the planning board or the town to be making decisions about whether or not to permit, support, not support development projects based on whether or not they're going to bring school-age children into the town. That's a fair housing issue. If people feel that that's an issue, my recommendation would be to keep it to yourself. Because it's really not something that the town is in a position to make decisions based on. It's just you just can't do it. The other thing, and Ms. McIntosh was on sort of the tail end of her comments, and so I was a little slow on the mute trigger. There's no place in this conversation for making assumptions about the type of person that's going to live in a project like this. So when we talk about crime and drug deals and things like that, that's not an acceptable comment to be made here in this forum. I just think that, again, if you feel that way, I would advise you to keep that inside, because it's just not acceptable. So I thought that was important to chime in on.
Thank you, Tim. So I'm going to move on to, and please forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Saban Orlon. If you could please introduce yourself and give us your proper pronunciation of your name and your address.
Yes, hi. I'm Stéphane Burnett. Sabine Morlon is my wife.
Okay.
So we live at, that's okay. We live at 924 Brush Hill Road. So we are directly the direct neighbors to that project, 936 Brush Hill Road. And I want to reiterate what we have just said. This project would be a complete eyesore compared to the single family character of this neighborhood. This neighborhood is a jewel for Milton. Even there's new and older constructions in here. The Woodmere project, for an example, is an example of new constructions that are respecting the character of this area. The way we are looking at it will be the most, I mean, our property value would be absolutely terribly impacted by the construction, not the nature of the project, but the fact that it would go from single family neighborhood to 40 condo units. As was mentioned earlier, there would be no more green space. It would be 2 buildings and parking lot in between, with the complete destruction of century-old trees in this yard. There would be no more green space. The entire lot would be occupied by buildings, a parking lot, and a retainment wall, and the driveway. It is completely, entirely out of character with the neighborhood. The added traffic would be a nightmare for everybody in this neighborhood, and that's a given. But the main problem is the complete destruction of the single family feel of this area that includes trees, a mix of a lower density of the occupancy of the land. And there is, each house and areas is respectful of the look and feel of the neighborhood. That would be gone. I mean, the first building would be right flush with Brush Hill Road, and it would occupy pretty much the entirety of a less than 1 acre property. I mean, right now it is occupied by a group home, which is again is respectful of the neighborhood feel for this neighborhood. So I think what the general feeling that I have is what I've been said before. It would be completely out of character with the look and feel of this neighborhood. It would certainly destroy our own property value. We'd be facing a parking lot and 2 buildings and traffic coming in and out on a permanent basis. This is completely out of character with the there is no sidewalks per se. It is not accessible to public transportation. It's definitely not within walking distance really of any public transportation of any kind. There is no playground for kids or for children. There is no availability of green space for children to play around. It is completely out of character for the project that have been built in this neighborhood. Again, if you look at the constructions in Woodmere, which is near us, across the street from us, that is an example of something that was respectful of the feel for this neighborhood. It was done in a way that did not completely destroy the look, feel, and sensitivities of this neighborhood. So is one example of something that was done well, and this is it.
Okay, thank you very much for the comments. We appreciate them. The next person is Robert Galvin.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good evening, members of the planning board. Attorney Robert Galvin. I represent a group of about 49 residents representing about 26 households in the Brush Hill and Cushing Road neighborhood. I spoke along with Attorney Ned Corcoran about a week ago to the select board, and I will try not to duplicate a couple of some of the comments you've already heard, but just so the planning board is aware, this project at 936 Brush Hill Road, which is the focus of what I would like to talk about briefly, is now a candidate for site eligibility at Mass Housing. This is the subsidizing agency for the Commonwealth, through which all developers proposing 40B projects, including in Milton, have to get a blessing from and a site eligibility determination. Mass Housing is looking only at a couple of very broad questions: whether the site is generally appropriate for the residential development that's being proposed, and they look at the site plans, they look at the topography, they look at the building styles, they look at the environmental resources, they look how a project integrates into the existing development patterns of a neighborhood, and then they typically issue a letter. And what I said to the selectmen that I would also duplicate to you is that it's not a lost cause to be detailed in your comments with Mass Housing, because in a normal circumstance, or as Ned mentioned, a developer will come to the neighborhood and say, "This is what I want to do," in order to try to find something that the neighbors could even get behind. This neighbor did none of that. So what we're asking you to do is to write a letter to the selectmen or select board and have that incorporated into comments to Mass Housing, so that those type of comments get addressed by this developer. If this developer reaches site eligibility, makes an application to the Zoning Board of Appeals. A couple of other details about the project: it's 10 one-bedroom units, 8 two-bedroom units, and 2 three-bedroom units, with 35 parking spaces. I think anybody looking at the plan that you have up there can see that there's nothing sustainable about this proposed development. Complies with none of the sustainable development principles. They just simply a clear cutting of site. And if I showed you a Google Earth map right now, you would see that there's probably 150 to 200 trees on this site, and they're all going to be gone, and they're going to replace them with about 5 trees. The retaining wall that you've heard Ms. McIntosh mention already is about 10 feet high, located 10 feet or less from the edge of the pavement. On top of that, you have a building that's going to be 2.5 stories tall. If you look at the residential neighbor abutting, and I think he just spoke, the second floor and roof are 16 to 20 feet higher than the ridge of that house. It's honestly looks like a fortress compared to anything else that I've ever seen in that neighborhood. And I've seen this done before. It's happened in one of the towns that I represent. It's terrible. This site ranges in elevation from elevation 125 at the back and dips all the way down to 102 at the front. That's 23 feet. I can't even tell you how much earthwork has to be done in order to make this development, but there is literally no portion of the site, as you've heard, that's going to be undeveloped. They claim that they're able to, they're only occupying about 65% of the lot coverage. I think if you're taking a look at that, I don't know what they're excluding, but there's no green space on this site. And if you're bringing in a couple of 3-bedroom units, you're going to have any children. Children are most welcome in any neighborhood in the town of Milton, but there'd be absolutely nothing for them to do on this site because there's no open space, there's no common areas, there's parking lots and buildings and steep slopes and retaining walls. And you'd probably need a fence on the top of those retaining walls. They're so tall. So this developer, who's from out of town, as Ned said, obviously picked up these properties in a very cheap fashion, and is proposing the absolute maximum you could ever develop on a site. And all you have to do on your site visit is try to walk along Brush Hill Road, and you hear you'll believe everything that the neighbors have said about how dangerous this site is and how reckless it is to propose such use here. Brush Hill Road is a scenic road. It's clear to me that they would be impacting trees that fall within the layout of the roadway, for which the planning board would have to at least be consulted and potentially hold a statutory meeting under the tree statute. again, they're making no effort to replace them. And to the extent that they're putting in any trees here, I don't know how the survivor would be located there, given the short distance between the street. You can't bike from here. This is a place you'd have to drive in and out of, and it is hazardous. It's down a slope coming up from where Curry is and coming down the street. It's tough to stop a car. There have been as many many accidents along that stretch, and the speeds are tremendous. I guess I would just generally say that there is you're supposed to balance a project with its neighborhood, and this does absolutely nothing to do that. If this applicant had come in with 3 or 4 units and tried to put them in some type of a townhouse thing that was reasonably set back, it would probably take a completely different flair with the neighborhood and probably even be arguably blended into this neighborhood. This does nothing to foster a sense of community. As a matter of fact, it just really pulls it apart. And I think from what I've seen in any of the master plan documents, it doesn't follow any of the principles of the master plan other than it creates some affordable housing. So smaller housing units that are more suitable for the neighborhood are absolutely what was called for. This applicant just didn't concern itself with that. And if phase 1 goals, priorities in that master plan were to preserve the character of these very distinctive neighborhoods, and I don't think anybody would seriously argue this isn't a distinctive neighborhood. This neighborhood has had many discussions with Curry College if they've acquired properties and tried to expand. And unlike this neighbor, Curry College actually did reach out and had meetings. And I attended some of those meetings where they sought permits for Milton in the past. So they're not even as respectful as Curry College has been. And that's just a shame. I am going to submit my comments and I'll send them over to the planner, and I'm going to send them to Mr. Dennehy too. And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Just for everyone's edification, the planning board, Mr. Galvin asked that we prepare a letter to send to the board of the select board, and that is exactly what we're intending to do. So we'll hear from the last 3 folks that have their hands raised, and then we'll start our discussion about what will be included in that letter. So the next speaker is Dwayne and Carol Day. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves with your name, whoever the speaker is, and your address, please.
Okay, my name is Dwayne Day, and my wife is Carol. We're at 53 Cushing Road, and we're right around the corner from the proposed project, 963 Brush Hill Road. 936, forgive, Brush Hill Road. And with that being said, I wanted to just clear the air regarding what was said about what Ms. McIntosh said. She was in no way saying that drug dealers or any lewd people would be moving into the project. She is simply speaking on some of the issues that we've had to endure over the past 16 years since we've been here. Our street is a quiet street. It is bookend with St. Pius, and it also runs right into Brush Hill Road. There is a Boston housing project on the other side of us, and there's a lot of foot traffic, a lot of kids who ride their bikes, people who drive their cars from that housing project through our neighborhood up and down Brush Hill Road, and they sometimes stop and make transactions in our neighborhood and on our street. I work for the Boston Fire Department, and I'm a rather tall person, so I have no problem walking up to someone's car that's parked on our street to see if they're okay, or to just be inquisitive of why they are parked on our street. I don't suggest this to everyone, but I will take it upon myself to do so, and have found myself talking to people who are waiting for or trying to do something that is unsavory. So this is what Ms. McIntosh was speaking of, and we've dealt with the Boston police, we've worked with the Milton police, and we worked with St. Pius trying to get lighting. We worked with Eversource, the electrical companies, to get more lighting on our street. And we have made good progress. This is what she was talking about. Nothing to do with who may move into a housing situation at 936. Nothing of the nature, just to clear that air. What we are seriously concerned about is safety. What we're seriously concerned about is a project that is smaller than my property, that they're going to throw up multiple units, rental units, with no green space for renters who will most likely have children. And they're going to be where? There's no public playground, there's no school, there's no public transportation, there's no amenities to speak of in this neighborhood. And to introduce that many residents into that little footprint is not proper, not proper at all. We also have to consider the 12 school-aged children that Ms. McIntosh spoke of that live on our street, who are using our street as they live there, but these families are still growing. There are people who are still having children on our street, and our neighborhood is growing. To add to it with all these other people would be detrimental. As our neighbors have said, we, my wife and I, and our neighbors, and everybody on our street walk Brush Hill Road on a daily basis, multiple times a day. There is no sidewalks on Brush Hill Road at all, especially in the 1 mile stretch from the end of Milton Street all the way down past Bradley, past Amore. No sidewalks. People walk the street every day and it's not safe. I travel on the far side of on the opposite side of the road just to allow people who are jogging or walking to have safe passage when I approach them. But if another car is coming, you have to come to a complete stop. It's not safe. And then to add people to that, I think that would be irresponsible. So I don't know if the developer really thought this through. I have more space on my lot than they are talking about proposing. And no one in the city of Milton would allow me to build that type of project on my space. I wouldn't want them to do that on that space either. It's just consideration. It's a neighborhood. It's a neighborhood of good people who paid good money for their property, who pay good taxes for the services. And honestly, let's keep it that way. There are houses on this stretch of road that were built in the 1700s and the 1800s. Beautiful homes. And we're going to plop down I don't even know what to call it. It's just, it's not well thought of, it's not well conceived. And we welcome Woodmere. They're great folks over there, but they took time, they preserved a aesthetic, and they also did a marvelous job of the landscaping and keeping a lot of the greenery. They were very nice to the abutters, including myself and our neighbors on this side of Cushing Road. But to build a retaining wall and then to build 2 stories right next to our neighbors and our neighbors that are across the way from them, people coming out of that driveway will have their headlights right into their living area. It's not a good project. And at the same time, if they're going to walk that property, could we be informed of the day and time that they're going to walk that property so that we know that they're there and we can actually chat with them and let them know how we feel as owners? I believe we have that right to know when they're going to come and walk that space, Mass Properties.
Okay, I will say thank you for your comment. Tim, there was a question about access to the property. I think you addressed that at the beginning of the meeting. I don't know if you had further comment on following up on our town council's suggestions on this that you would like to share.
The site visit that the planning board, as well as the select board, members of the conservation commission, potentially members of the historical commission, are going to be doing on Wednesday is not a public meeting. So, you know, those boards are being invited as part of a process that Mass Housing asks us to do. You know, it'd be the same as if you went to anyone else's property and wanted to get on site.
So there's no requirement to make it a meeting available to the public.
The property owner has expressed hesitance to open it up to the number of people that we anticipate would be interested in showing up. And so, you know, again, it's not a public meeting. It isn't.
You did say it was somebody just said it was a group home currently?
Tim, do you want to address that? You mentioned that to me.
I have heard that, yes.
Okay.
This is Denny. I just wanted to ask, is it also a matter of because of the pandemic, a health and safety reason? Because normally we do have public meetings where the public can attend, but I understand we're doing something special here, and I just wanted to see if we could revisit that for the public to understand.
I think it's because there are residents there. The other site visits that we've had, the properties have been vacant. Nobody
That's
was
true.
on Canton Ave, nobody lived in Canton Ave, and nobody was on Blue Hill Ave. This is the first one that's had people living in it. So I think that's the difference.
Additionally, these are the state's meetings essentially, so they can set the parameters. I think we've been invited as a courtesy so that we're prepared to provide comment during the official process, but I don't think that it's required to have a public walkthrough. And I think that's really the state's prerogative, whether or not they would force the issue.
I just want to have Tim maybe provide some further, maybe at the next, well, I guess the site walk's going to take place before the next meeting. But I would like to point out that members of the public were able to attend the site walks on the Parkway, on Canton Ave, on Blue Hill Ave. And
Yeah, but as I said,
Milton.
Cheryl, those houses were vacant. It's not the situation here.
And both of these are not vacant?
Well, I don't think anybody's in Amber Road, and nobody said that one was a problem. But Tim did say the one issue is the Brush Hill Road one, the Brush Hill Road one, because there are tenants there.
Okay, so if that's the actual reason for this one, I think it'd just be important for people to understand it, because if they realize that people could participate in other sites, then it's really would make sure that that's the reason that this one is different. I think is important.
And those also took place before the COVID situation broke out.
Well, we didn't go inside these buildings, so we would be outside, but I definitely just think it's important to have clarity for the public. That's all.
I agree. I just also want to make sure that everybody knows this isn't our decision. So there's very little that we can do about it as a board. And I think the ideal scenario would be that we public walkthrough just like we did on the other ones. But you know, whether that happens or not is unfortunately out of our hands. So I just don't want to create the impression that we have an opportunity to change it, because we don't. But I would like to call on our last two speakers, and then we can have a more substantive discussion about the application. So the next person is Lawrence Voke. If you could please just state your name.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
My name is Larry Voke, and I am opposed to this 936 Brush Hill Road project. I live diagonally across from it. And if you look at the aerial photograph, there is a structure over on Walcott Road, which is a Work Inc. 40B structure that was built about 8 years ago. And that abuts the rear of my property. We have owned our house for almost 14 years. We love Milton. We love everything about it. And 8 years ago, they put this structure in, and There are lights that shine. There's a big black top driveway to support all the vans that are parked there. There are about 6 or 7 vans at night. And there are illuminating spotlights at night that shine into our bedroom window. And this has devalued our property. And now we're proposing this monstrosity across the street from us. We will be abutted by 2 40B structures. We can't sleep at night. I have an 8-year-old and a 13-year-old children, and they sense our distress. And we are worried that we're going to lose our largest investment in our lives is our home. And we're so worried that we're going to lose the value of our home. I'm so distressed. And that's all I have to say. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for sharing with us. And I just want to make sure you know that we feel terrible about the situation for all of the neighbors who have spoken tonight. And we still have one more neighbor to speak. But the planning board, various members of the board have had similar experiences with projects proposed in their neighborhood, and we've talked about it quite a bit, and our heart really goes out to you, and we feel terrible, and to the extent that we can be helpful, we absolutely will. So thank you very much for taking the time to come before us tonight, and I'm so sorry to hear that you are so distressed, and I hope you know that we are going to do our best job to work to advocate for you. The last speaker is Christine Costello. If you could please introduce yourself and give us your name and address, that would be great. Oops. Okay, there you go.
Great. Hi, thank you.
Sure.
My name is Christina Costello Correa, and I live at 64 Cushing Road. And I just want to say I am extremely impressed with this committee, the process, and most of all my neighbors from Brush Hill and Cushing Road associations. I'm a little bit nervous, and this has been a long night. I don't usually call into things like this, so I'm going to get right to my points. And I think I'm going to say some things that are a little bit different than other points that have been made, which have all been, that are all legitimate and fabulous points. But I'm just thinking about a couple of other things. So we all know that these developers are also proposing projects that are actually probably much greater than what they are willing to settle for. For example, my past experiences with this means if they're asking for 20, they're going to try to negotiate us to 12. Okay, so we need to be clear that we're not just opposed to 20 in the density. We need to be clear that we are opposed to these 100% fundamentally. When the developers drop from a project of 20, when they drop 8 and get to 12, right, they're then going to respond to the really great points about no green space and no playgrounds, etc., with, oh, now we can put in a playground, right? So they start out with 20, they negotiate to 12, and then they put in a playground, and they will try to represent that they have negotiated in good faith with the neighborhood. That's what I've experienced in the past. So let's be honest about that. We're not really fighting about the real density that's currently proposed. I think that's a scam. I think I'm like so nervous because I came from the city, and I always thought when I moved out to a suburb and a proposal like this came up that I would be in favor of it because I believe in affordable housing. So it hurts me that I don't, but these aren't the right places. And if the town wants someone to volunteer to look for better places, I will. I've tried to help. So that's it. I'm sorry. It's been a long day.
Oh, please don't apologize. My heart goes out to you. I appreciate you coming, and know that we all appreciate you coming, and our heart breaks for you right now. And I'm very just so sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I think the board should start our discussion about the applications for site eligibility and the types of things that we would like to be included in our letter. We've gotten quite a bit of great comment from the neighborhood already. I think they touched on a lot of points that all of us have probably picked up, but who would like to kick off this discussion?
Well, could I just ask a question first?
Yeah, please.
On Amer Road,
Yes.
Go with the sort of that one first. Is there's 4 curb cuts that are on Amor Road and then 1 on Brush Hill Road. Isn't Brush Hill Road a state highway? Don't they have to get permission?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I've asked Chase Berkeley, the director of the Department of Public Works, exactly where. So Truman Parkway is obviously a state road. That portion of Brush Hill Road that sort of becomes Truman Highway is a state road. The portion of Brush Hill Road that kind of goes into Milton as opposed to going into Hyde Park is a town road. So I've asked him to kind of clarify, at least for me, where he feels that the right of way of the state road ends. His opinion, just in a conversation I had with him, was that this would be a curb cut opening onto the state road. So, 40B is about, I think we're all familiar. It's about,
No, I understand that. Randolph Ave has the same situation.
Yeah, so they would need a state access permit. They would need to go through a MIPA process. So if they're looking to avoid processes by going through the comprehensive permit project, they may want to rethink needing to go through MIPA.
They are going to have to go through. They're going to have to get a state permit. The comprehensive permit only deals with local regulations, not the state ones. So it's just, my question was, I used to live on Brush Hill Road, and in fact, my house, that there's a curve there. A friend of mine's son was killed there. There have been accidents on that stretch all the time. And my when I bought my house, the guy that I bought the house from said, "Oh, just like last year, some car came through the lawn of the house next to me and took out my front steps." So, so I know where the location is. So I just was curious because I think that curb cut that they're showing on Brush Hill Road is a problem. And I just wanted to mention that if we were doing the draft, just wanted to see that whether that's an issue.
Tim, can you bring up the site plan for us on Amor Road? We'll start with that one. Thank you.
Can we also look at the 3D? They actually did provide 3D for this application. So, April, may I go ahead?
Please. Oh, yeah.
So for those who may still be watching and participating, this developer has now 4 applications, 4 40B applications. The one at 648 Canton Avenue and 582 Blue Hill Avenue, at even greater densities than these 2. And in neighborhoods that have neighbors just as concerned as neighbors that we've heard tonight. And so I think there's another application with a different developer in East Milton Square. And you've heard people talk about the one in Randolph Ave. And so I do think it's important for all the neighbors, for all the residents to understand that we may be continuing to see these applications because we are nearly 1,000 units short of what we need in order to stave off these kinds of 40Bs. And we're all going to have to work together, as the last speaker said, to help find reasonable sites to help us achieve our 10% affordable requirement. And it would be much better if we had developers who were willing to work with us rather than present to us things that are completely out of scale with our neighborhoods. And so that's my preface for all of this. But on this one in particular, I think the single family or the single unit structures and townhouse structures as building types are actually a better building type for some sites, and perhaps this site, but not at the level of density that is shown here. And the reason that I say that is it's more in keeping with the type of housing stock that we find. And the fact that this, though, has so many of them and so close to the property line and has such numbers of parking spaces, as people have already said, makes this overdeveloped. The one way to increase green space would be to have parking within the structures. Townhouses are commonly designed to have parking on the first floor. It would require these to be at least 2.5 stories, perhaps 3. but it could still be done within 35 feet, which is our single family height limit. And that would free up a lot of asphalt in the center of the lot. And I think that there shouldn't be access, as people have said, from Brush Hill Road. So maybe you couldn't have so many structures directly facing Amore Road because you would want to provide access, one location, I think, to bring access into the site. And then both of these sites, and this one in particular, it's a little bit deceiving because this looks like it's a flat site. And this is common for this developer too, that they completely ignore the topography and come in and clear cut with retaining walls. And this is something that's driven me crazy, as you all know.
I've never seen a retaining wall I didn't like. I mean, it's ridiculous.
And it's like, okay, these architects, as an architect myself for 30 years, I begin to wonder about this firm that's designed all of these with this same approach, which is so insensitive to everything around it. There are other ways to design to a site that has a topographic change that's more respectful. But it means that you're not going to take a piece of paper and see how many units you can jam onto that site. And so I think we go back and with similar letters to what we've had before. I mean, one of the things that I find rather distressing is that Mr. Galvin mentioned that Mass Housing has criteria and design guidelines which applications are supposed to pay attention to, but the ones that we've seen and we've pointed out are completely incongruous with the guidelines, have gotten their project eligibility letters in any case. But it doesn't hurt for us to point out, I think, this incongruous design, and that we still are opposed to it for the same kinds of reasons.
Thank you. I agree with every single thing you said. Anybody else share comments on Amore Road? Amore Road. Rich or Danny or Kathleen?
I'll go with them.
Sure.
So I know we're going to have to dust off the old letters, but I am looking forward to seeing the site. Again, just the sheer massing is outrageous. It goes without saying that this is beyond dense. The no public transportation. I thought what Mr. Galvin said, it is not a lost cause to try to get as much of the detail in as possible. And that neighbor that mentioned that he would like to be at the site walk, I'm very sorry that the state is not accommodating you on that, because I do like to meet the neighbors when I do go on site walks. I would urge you, if you have any details that you want to convey, I'm available via my town email address. And if you want to set up a phone call, I'd be happy to talk to neighbors and hear them out. We don't want to forget any details. I'm going to take a real hard look at the sustainability principles. I thought Mr. Galvin had a point. Cheryl and I and everyone else on the board has been very concerned about, moving, clear cutting and just going in and regrading to that extent with, what did they say, 10-foot high retaining walls is just drives me crazy. It is so bad for the environment and the water tables and this is just the sustainability of the whole ecosystem in the area. The fact that it's a scenic road does allow us a public tree hearing, but I don't know that will stop it. But if there would be, and I guess I'm speaking on both of them, if there would be a MIPA meeting, I would, a review, I would be interested in that, because that is helpful. The information that comes from the MIPA review falls under the sustainability principles. So if there is anything that is found there, it could be more costly for the developer. And the developer, once you hit a tipping point, when it becomes too much money, that's when they may walk away. For my neighborhood, it was the blue spotted salamander that we found, and the archaeology resources, and the trees and the access issues that were just going to end up costing them so much money that I think the developers gave up. So, so as Mr. Galvin said, you have to try. It's not a lost cause to find as many details as you can. It's ideal if the details are quantifiable, though. Like I've said at other meetings, if you could, quantify the safety issues, coming up with the traffic incidents reports or fatalities or anything like that Kathleen had mentioned. I think that those are very important things. As we know, because we've been through enough of these meetings, and this is the same across the state, people always complain about the traffic, and the traffic is going to increase, and the people at the state, their eyes just kind of glaze over because everybody's going to have more traffic. But if you can quantify it with real safety issues, then I think that those details stand out more and get heard more. So traffic mitigation for real safety issues is a costly issue. It is a distinctive neighborhood, both those areas. Open space is a sustainability issue. Safety, the clear cutting is a sustainability issue as far as I'm concerned. I'm disappointed to hear that neighbor complained about the lights that he's bearing the brunt of. I would think that he or someone could complain to the state and at least ask for dark sky compliant lights for him and for all of these 40Bs that we're dealing with. And it is heartbreaking. I have to tell you, this has been very exhausting as a volunteer on a board like this to be hit with, what are we up to, 6 or 7 40Bs in less than a year during a pandemic. It's just plain exhausting to imagine what each of the neighbors and abutters are going through in all of these projects. And like April said, my heart breaks for you. And I want to do everything I can to help you as your representative. Thank you.
Thanks, Denny. Rich, did you have any additional comment?
No, I don't want to repeat it. I mean, I think it sounds like we're not it sounds like we're fairly on the same page. I'm looking forward to seeing the site and the others. Yeah, and going through the process. I don't disagree with anything I've heard.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen,
April,
Tim, go ahead.
I was going to, and Kathleen may have more knowledge of this than me, and if not, we may need to look into it. I know that our scenic roads regulations are enabled by state statute, but I wonder if the scenic roads provisions are one of the local reviews that get overridden by 40B.
I believe they are.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
Sorry.
Did you have any more
But by state law, I'm sorry, but by state law, we still have to have a tree hearing, and if any information comes out of that tree hearing, but I don't know which significant information would come out that would actually influence a state decision on it, but we're still obligated to have a public meeting on the trees on any state scenic road.
And I think it's probably relevant to point out the designation.
Well, I think to point out in general that Brush Hill Road is a scenic and historic road. And so, I think that, the whole idea of clear cutting the whole thing and putting up those lovely retaining walls, they must have some stock in concrete company or something. I don't really understand why they have such a desire to do them. But I think that's something we should definitely include. And I think that's something that should be pointed out to Mass Housing when they do their site walk.
And I'm sorry to continue to interrupt. I did want to. Cheryl mentioned we're 1,000 units off. We're actually not. I'm looking at the housing production plan. We need 964 subsidized housing inventory units. We currently have there's a gap of 485 units. So that's how much we need to get to 10%. And we're just and I'm reviewing these projects just the same as everybody else, and I've made a lot of the same observations. But one of the observations I've made also is that if all of these 7 projects, Randolph Ave, Blue Hills Parkway, Blue Hill Ave, Canton Ave, Amer Road, Brush Hill Road, East Milton, go through at the unit counts that they're at, we're maybe a dozen units off of 10%. And that's safe harbor forever.
No, until the next census.
Right, for 10 years. Till the next census.
The next census.
I don't think our denominator is going to change so much that, the project that puts us over that dozen units that we need, it may be Winter Valley, quite frankly. And so, again, we're reviewing these projects, and I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of mitigation that needs to be discussed, and there's a lot of, issues that are going to come out in the public hearing. But, again, we're dealing with a set of projects that will get us the majority of the way to safe harbor, if they happen.
The problem
Well,
with that
we get
is
safe harbor other ways, Tim, than otherwise approving all of these things. We could get safe harbor if we were making progress on our housing production plan, which is a much smaller number than trying to go for the entire 10%. We could once again try, after we got a few of these things approved, to do the 1.5%, although of area devoted to affordable housing, although that's a moving target and hasn't passed. It went down in flames in the 3 towns that have just tried it. But, at some point in the game, we might get that. So there's all kinds of other safe harbors that we can achieve besides approving all of these and getting close to 10%.
Yeah, Kathleen, I don't disagree. I'm just pointing out the math. And like I said, we're looking at all the various paths and all the various mechanics that safe harbor through the housing production plan would necessitate. I've been talking, Denny and I had a conversation. I've had conversations with others. My back of the envelope kind of calculations on the land area count, these projects would put us close to that as well. Again, that's not advocating for these projects. It's just saying that, this is what safe harbor looks like under the statutory minima. It's this number of projects, this number of units.
But what that also means is you take the people who are the closest to each one of these, and you're putting the majority of the impact on a smaller section of neighborhoods, rather than looking at trying to do this where it's dispersed throughout town. And that's the point that I would like to emphasize, which is a point I made earlier, for all of the town to look at this as a townwide problem and look to help us find solutions that distribute these units throughout town so that they're not concentrated in particular sites that are not suitable for the scale that's been proposed for them. And just to say, well, too bad for those particular neighbors. I don't support that approach whatsoever.
I don't think the board does at all. Cheryl, I agree with you. And I agree with the comment that you just made. I mean, I think my comments about this site were going to be, it's a lot of impervious surface. There's going to be a lot of stormwater impacts. The access point to Brush Hill Road just is, in my mind, crazy from a safety perspective. It's too big. It's too cramped. There's no open space. All of the things that you all had said. But one big point I have is that this isn't a previously developed site. I mean, I think when we're talking about adding multifamily units, which we know we need to do as a community, we need to look at places, are there redevelopment opportunities near transit, near amenities, walkable to jobs, which we don't have that many of in our town, but some places. And one example is what we just did in Adams Village at the last town meeting with the new zoning there. I think we need to think about how to drive the market to make those locations more attractive. So we're not taking down trees. We're not draining our infrastructure in places that frankly weren't built for this type of density. So I agree with all the points. I think we need to talk about how to take these comments and the comments that we've heard from the public. And by the way, anybody who's listening to this meeting, whether you're participating in the meeting or listening remotely or watch the video later. If you would like to submit comments, you're more than welcome to do so. I would suggest that you submit them to Tim Straczynski as our town planner so that we can incorporate them and think about them as we're writing our letter. But my question for the board is, how are we going to get this letter drafted? Do we want Tim to do it? Kathleen, I think you wrote our last couple of letters. Are you inclined to do this? How do we move from the discussion tonight, where I think we've made a lot of good points, to putting pen to paper so we have something to review between now and our next meeting?
Well, I can take, I mean, I've got the stuff we did the last time, you know, on my system. So I've been taking notes as to what the comments have been made on, you know, by all the abutters and members of the board. So I could give it a first shot and then send it off to Tim and he could take it from there.
Considering that Tim's letter is going to be the one for the select board, maybe it does make sense for Kathleen. Thank you for volunteering. And I'm happy to contribute in ways that I may, if you'd like, on the comments that I made. And then Tim can take that and include that in the way he sees fit for the select board one.
Yes. So I think
Sounds like a plan.
if you're
Yeah,
willing.
thank you, Kathleen. Thank you
Yeah.
for offering to do that. Thank you.
Right. And also for the public, Kathleen has significant amount of expertise in 40B in representing our town and other towns in 40B issues. So she's also a former member of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So she has a particular lens that she's looking at these projects through because she has expertise understanding, also as a real estate lawyer, what the decision points are for mass housing when they're reviewing the site eligibility. So, you know, we can talk about concerns about I hate to use this example after Tim mentioned not to, but school children, that's just not a consideration for the state at all. So it doesn't actually help us to put that in the letter of comment. But other things like permitting concerns, infrastructure burdens, open space, consistency with the state's own sustainable development principles, all of those could be part of the decision-making process. So I would appreciate very much, Kathleen, I do appreciate your offer. I think we all do. And what we will do, I suspect, is you can draft it, send it to Tim, and then Tim can circulate it to us.
Okay.
And then we can perhaps submit comments to Tim on the letter so that we have something that's more fully formed for the 12th. And we can then just go through it line by line, maybe with a screen share, and make edits while we're in the meeting so that Tim has something deliverable to the select board the following day.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay. All right. Now let's pull up the site plan for the other project. 936 Brush Hill Road. I think a lot of the comments are actually going to be the same.
Yeah, I think here again, they didn't do the townhouse and the single unit structure. So this is more typical of what they've done in terms of larger structures, inconsistent with the topography has already been pointed out. And at least here they're actually showing us the retaining walls that that are necessary to do this, which they haven't been so honest about in other applications. But my comments otherwise remain the same on this as they were for the other.
Yeah, mine are too.
Mine too.
Richard, Kathleen, do you have anything additional on this one?
No, it's just, I mean, it's seriously, I don't understand what these folks are doing.
I know, this is like two platforms. I don't understand it either. So I don't want the folks that were on the call representing Brush Hill Road to think that we're not talking about this in greater detail because we don't care. That's not the case at all. I just think that the comments that you all have mentioned, as well as the comments that we just mentioned about the inconsistency or incompatibility with the neighborhood and the impervious surface and the lack of open space and loss of trees and what have you is the same. The topographical issues all apply to this site as well. So we are certainly going to consider both projects. Our letters will be specific. We'll have one specific letter for 936 Brush Hill Road and one specific to the other project that will talk to the site detail. But it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot more to discuss on this one right now. So,
Yeah, and just for members of the public to know is that when I do these drafts, I go through the application in full, in detail, make notes as I can as to what they've put in the application that seems to be inconsistent or nutty or whatever. And
Or not true.
not true, and put those in the letters as well. So don't think that I'm just sort of relying on just a back of the envelope sort of thing. I will actually read the applications in full.
And all the members will provide detailed comment as well. And so at
well, I'm sorry, April.
I was just going to say, we're going to go through these letters line by line at our next meeting on November 12th. So anybody that has a particular interest would like to, again, submit comment. If there's something specific you want to call out to make sure it rises to our attention or that we don't miss it, you're also welcome to join us on the 12th and watch us go the letter, and we'll have an opportunity for discussion then as well. Go ahead, Tim, you had something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, for the listening public at home, if you're inclined and want to get into the weeds, it's 760 CMR 56 are the 40B regulations. If you go to the section about site eligibility, you can read about all the different findings that the subsidizing agency has to make a determination on site eligibility. And you know, I think that'll sort of be the basis of what the town's letter will be about whether those findings can be found. And it's you know, if you're the type of person that likes to read those sorts of things, you know, it's out there. One thing I wanted to kind of just call attention to before we leave this conversation. First of all, you know, we had a little conversation earlier. I'm not saying that these are good sites, or that I would pick these sites, or that I think these are particularly great developments. I spent my entire career as a planner kind of trying to avoid things like this. But you know, 40B is what it is, and we need to deal with the situation that we have at hand. But you know, we've been talking about these projects in particular, but I think we've heard a lot of things tonight and in previous meetings and at the select board that, you know, are problems for these projects, but I think are also problems for these neighborhoods. When we talk about no parks, when we talk about no sidewalks, when we talk about no dangerous traffic, when we talk about no amenities, when we talk about no public transit, those are issues. Those were issues yesterday. There are issues today, and there'll be issues whether or not these projects happen. And so, you know, I'm hearing that as the town planner. You know, we're looking at that in terms of these projects, but I'm also looking at it in terms of, you know, if we want to have, you know, a neighborhood and a town that is welcoming and accessible to everybody, these are big red flags for me.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So now we can move on. I think the next item is the budget. Is that right, Tim? It's not on my agenda, but I think that's where you revised it.
Yes.
This is going to be a very brief discussion, but I would like you to mention, just in lieu of your comment a moment ago, open space.
Yeah. So we had a department head meeting recently, and so the Planning and Community Development Department is actually under the Select Board. I think the only thing in the budget for that is my salary. So don't worry about that. That's covered. But our department does do the Planning Board and the Master Plan Implementation Committee budget. And, you know, given the very uncertain state and local revenue situation as a result of the pandemic and the public health emergency, what we've been instructed is basically, you know, whatever the appropriation was last year, it gets carried forward. Contractual obligations, salaries go up, you know, however they're supposed to go up. We do have Julia's salary on the planning board budget, so that's taken care of. But you know, whatever was in last year's budget is what, you know, the town accountant has kind of just automatically populated our budget template for that. And so, you know, there really isn't very much of a conversation about, okay, you know, what do we want to do and how much more or less money do we need? You know, we do need to have a conversation about, okay, you know, this is the budget that, you know, we can reasonably expect to get an appropriation for. And I can distribute those templates. I didn't do it ahead of the meeting, but I can do that tomorrow. You know, and we can have that conversation about what our kind of plans are for fiscal 22. But in terms of, you know, we'd like to, you know, make an argument for some more money from town meeting. It's not in the cards for this fiscal year so far. The state has been this is my very limited understanding, not very forthcoming about what our local aid expectations are, and that has all sorts of cascading effects down the line for the budget. And so, from a conservative standpoint, we feel that this was the best kind of way to go forward. So the deadline that I have from the town accountant is December 1st to get the planning board and master plan implementation committee budget to them. I can distribute those budget templates for you to look at. It should be a blast from the past from last year. But I think, you should take a look at those, and, we can put this on the agenda for the next meeting as well. If there are any, more detailed conversation that we want to have, or if you've got questions that I can bring, to the front office to ask about anything, we can certainly do that. But, while we're here and, we're still, I'm new to the budget game. And so, the idea, I feel like fiscal 21 just started, and now it's like, all right, see you later. Let's talk about fiscal 22. But we're right in the middle of fiscal 21. And so just a couple of things that are kind of ongoing, ongoing contracts and ongoing, items in the planning board and master plan implementation committee budget. The MPIC has talked about the townwide traffic model, which is it's almost up and running. We're just waiting on updated traffic volume counts from the central transportation planning staff, which unfortunately, again, because of the public health emergency, have been delayed. But we want to make sure we get that right. So that contract is still kind of open. There's still more work to do, but that money is encumbered, so that project is good to go. The one other thing on the sort of MPIC plate is they had talked about a bicycle and pedestrian master plan. That was actually part of the appropriation for, it was the townwide traffic model and a bike and ped master plan. I'm doing a little bit of sorting out of how to bring some extra money into that project, but I have been in touch with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, who Bill Clark earlier in the year had been in touch with them to sort of get the ball rolling on that plan. And, they'll be able to provide significant matching funds for that plan. So, once I get everything lined up, we may have to move a little bit of money around. But we can start to talk to them about a scope and a contract for a bike and ped master plan. So that's a little preview of coming attractions for that. And then the other thing, we obviously have Judy Barrett's work in East Milton, which again is ongoing. That's a contract that runs through the end of the year. We'll be having that product, a nice New Year's treat. Judy's work, she's been working very hard with the East Milton Working Group. So again, that's an open contract that we've got money encumbered for that. That's out of the planning board budget.
Can I just make one note of that? So just for the planning board's reference, I spoke with Judy today, and she's making good progress. They're working with the expanded neighborhood group. She feels very confident that things are going well. She was invited to attend tonight, but she was unable, and that works out fine because we didn't have time for her anyways. What I think she's going to have 2 more neighborhood meetings or working group meetings, and then they're going to furnish their final report in a public meeting and a report to the planning board with images and what have you. She asked me if I felt like we needed her to come to our board before she's done, and I sort of felt like that was not necessary, but I'd like the board's input. I mean, she only has 2 more meetings left. She's going to wrap this up by the end of the year. She probably will not have the public meeting, the open public meeting that's required until January, because we just don't want to interfere with calendars around the holidays and whatnot, because it will be pushing right up against Christmas and New Year's. I think that's probably preferable. I want to get your input on that too. If we can extend her, doesn't have any cost impacts, but just through the end of January as opposed to the end of December to give us a little bit more time. But also I would rather her just keep pushing ahead and come to us when she has a final product, but you can let me know what you guys think.
April?
Yes.
I have no problem pushing out until the end of January. But can we at least get some kind of table of contents or some kind of overview? Because I want to make sure that we're getting everything covered that we thought we were going to get covered, and not just get a report and then find that there's something missing.
So one thing I missed in my description is she's going to provide us with a memo.
Ah, very good.
Yeah. Sorry, the most important detail. So she's going to provide us with a memo that Tim can send to the board members. So if we see any red flags in it, we have an opportunity to reach out and discuss it with her. But she'll provide the memo, and then we'll just hear from her for her final report if there's no challenges.
Okay, and then I have one other comment relative to budget, but maybe others have a comment about East Milton first.
No, I just want to see something done.
Okay. My comment about budget is that when we put in the budget request for fiscal year 21 that we have now, and the town administrator and the town accountant called me when I was chair and asked me what we thought we might use those funds for. One of the things that I mentioned was that if Milton Village overlay passed, that we were interested in design guidelines. And so we had talked, there were neighbors who attended our meetings who said, you know, that would be an important factor for them or important feature. So I would just like for us to consider advancing that if we have, as we thought we would, funds available for that.
So I'm going to be very, very straightforward with the planning board. The sort of the budget management thing is not the skill set that I brought to this job. I brought other skills, which is not to say that, no, I appreciate that, April. So if it sounds like I'm very cautious and equivocal about things, it's because I'm just trying to be very deliberate about this. I've got a lot of support from Allison and Julia who have been sort of, you know, shepherding this particular year's budget, and Julia has experience with previous budgets. And then obviously the town accountant's office has been very supportive. It's a system that I just need to get used to. I feel like every day I'm becoming more self-aware as an organism in terms of this budget, and I'm learning something new, and it's really good and interesting. But it's a lot to process. And so I think, Cheryl, to your point, you know, I need to just, I've actually asked Judy to just confirm with me. I have an idea, but I wanted her to confirm just how much is remaining to be owed to her. And again, you know, my big concern is just making sure that money's there, you know, before we, you know, move on to other things. I suspect that it is, and I suspect that there is some quantity of money left over. And I want to be able to get you that figure, and I will soon. But I do think that, you know, the design guidelines conversation, you know, is a good one. And I think, you know, based on my understanding of the history of that project, is something that people would really appreciate. And I think it was kind of part of the conversation, you know, leading up to the rezoning. So, you know, happy to talk about that, about kind of what the scope of that would be, and what kind of, you know, what kind of firms we would look to, you know, maybe perhaps put together an RFP for that. The other thing that, and April was alluding to this, and this is a sort of medium-term project, you know, and it may require, you know, sharing some budget with other departments or pursuing some other state grants or funding opportunities, is an update of the town's open space and recreation plan, which has not been updated since 2006, which is a long time. Other towns have done a little bit more of a fastidious job of maintaining their open space plans. And there's a couple really important reasons to do this. You know, the first of which is philosophically, you know, Milton is a town that takes a lot of pride in its open space. And I think it makes a lot of sense to have a strategic plan for, you know, what our open space needs are from a maintenance perspective, from a growth perspective, from a conservation and ecology perspective. So there's a planning argument to be made. You know, there's a financial argument to be made. You are not eligible for several large pots of money from the Commonwealth if you don't have an updated open space plan. There's a lot of cash out there slushing around for maintaining parks, building parks, acquiring conservation land that we can avail ourselves of if we have and are guided by an updated open space plan. There's a ballot question on the ballot next week for CPA that if it's successful, a portion of that money, at least 10%, but I suspect more than 10%, in any given year needs to be spent on open space needs. And so I think it's really important to have, a plan in place to sort of guide the decision making of the town and the Community Preservation Committee if that ballot question passes and that group forms. And then finally, this was kind of driven in our part and by work that Allison has been spearheading for us in terms of, inventorying our town-owned assets and putting town land to the best possible use. We don't have a ton of town-owned land that's kind of sitting around, but there's a fair amount of it. And a lot of it is in parks custody. A lot of it is designated as open space, but currently just sort of, there's no parks on it. Ash Street Playground is a prime example. There are other parks parcels that, have not been developed as open space or recreational, accessible recreational uses. And so, folks have their eye on those parcels every now and again, and it's not responsible from a planning perspective to just say, okay, let's get that out of parks custody and put some development on it. You really do need to do the open space planning and figure out, what are the town's open space needs? And, these parcels are fallow right now. Do we need them for playing fields, or are we all set? And can we, deploy town resources, perhaps for affordable housing development? Can we assemble a portfolio of town-owned properties, and develop a disposition program? You can't do that without putting the first building block in place, which is understanding what your open space needs are. So that's a big project that I'd like to engage in. I think it would have really good cascading effects for the town. But again, it's not a ton of money, but it's a bit. But there are state resources out there. Town of Hull has used state grants to update their open space plan. There's technical assistance from the Regional Planning Association. So that's another sort of bit of money that, either in this fiscal year or through a combination of fiscal years, I'd be interested in taking a look at. But Cheryl, to your point, I do think also, the design guidelines for Milton Village. I know the history of that project. I was here at the start. I showed up at the end. And so I know, how important that is. So I think that's definitely a part of the picture.
So one thing I just, for your information, Tim, is that, the former director of planning had told me that, we received a grant from MAPC, the regional planning agency, to do the early part of that Milton Village work, which you were here for that early part too. But that until that passed, that we may not have been seen as favorably because that sort of grant money hadn't necessarily been put to use so well yet. But now that it has been, I think it might be worth going back to MAPC and saying, do they have some grant money now to help us with those design standards too, or design guidelines?
Yeah, and the governor just put extra money in the DLTA. It's District Local Technical Assistance Fund, which is that planning money that runs through the RPAs to make grants to cities and towns for various things. So I think there are going to be additional resources available. And like you said, Cheryl, now we're in a great position to ask for more since we've had a success in one place,
Right.
or to keep the ball rolling anyways.
Right.
Okay. So Tim, is that it for budget?
Yeah, I'll get the details of what the proposal is out to you all, and perhaps we can again the conversation about how much is not there right now. So it is what it is in some ways, but I do think it's worth just having a conversation with some more details. I don't know if Denny was raising her hand. She's now adjusting her screen.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I wanted to support both projects. I think they're both very, very important. I really want Tim to have the tools and the information to do his job as a town planner. And I think he's He's very creative and intuitive, and I just want him to have access to everything we can. I think it's a brilliant idea to look at anywhere we can put affordable housing in a way that's thoughtful, and that sounds like the most thoughtful approach I've heard yet, except for some of Allison's ideas too. So I'm really glad you're exploring them, and I want to do everything I can to support you in that.
Yeah, and Allison's been quiet, but she's kind of the backbone of a lot of this stuff. So kudos to her. And Cheryl, let's talk offline about what we're thinking for design guidelines, and maybe we can bring a proposal to talk about in a little more detail.
Okay, sounds good.
I've been snacking, just so you know.
That's not fair.
Joy in a minute.
I have some M&Ms staring me in the face, but I can't. Okay, so now we should move on to zoning, which is a very thoughtful meeting, actually, and I love the way the agenda is set up because, you know, we're talking about these 40B projects, which none of us want. The town didn't invite these projects in. There is such a thing as a friendly 40B, but none of these projects underway right now are very friendly. And it's really, you know, a great segue to zoning because we need to do something that's going to encourage new affordable housing opportunities in the right places and use some of our existing building stock for new and alternate ways to kind of get creative. Somebody said earlier, I think it might have been Kathleen, you know, that just approving all of these projects, I guess, would be kind of a solution, but we don't want to do that. We don't want to see all these projects move forward, and certainly not at the density being proposed. We need to look at every single option available. And I know Jenny's in favor of the land count, and, you know, some people are in favor of looking for other parcels to do a friendly 40B, which I think would be great. We're also looking at what kind of zoning changes we can make to kind of tick things off. We're going to have to use every single tool available to us. So with that, we have a couple of articles to discuss tonight. I don't know who, Kathleen, do you want to lead the discussion?
Yeah. So we had a draft of this. So we've already had a condominium conversion special permit in the bylaw to begin with, but it was really limited as to where it could be used, really limited to where it could be used and how it could be used. And so I did this revision of it, taking the existing the existing bylaw and reorganizing it a little bit and widening the application of it. So the draft has been floating around for a while. Cheryl sent along some comments, and I don't know whether Tim had sent it out. It's on the agenda as materials. Just wanted to probably maybe the best thing to sort of go through it in detail. So as I said, I took the existing statute, the existing bylaw that we had, and then decided to sort of take a look at where it could be applied. And so before, the one we had was, it required huge lots. And so 5 acres. And so that meant that the projects proposed for Canton Ave, the 40B, and the one for Blue Hill Ave couldn't be converted into condos because with using the existing buildings and the existing structures because they're less than 5 acres. So first of all, I really wanted to take a look to see whether we could do this with smaller lots so that we could provide an alternative to the developers to say, well, you don't have to do 130 units. You could do a much more sensitive design using our new condominium conversion bylaw. So the kinds of sites that are eligible for this new permit would be parcels that have one or more existing buildings. They front on a public way, not a private street, with no less than 3,000 was in my draft. Cheryl has proposed increasing that number to buildings that have more than 4,000 square feet. Maybe Cheryl could explain why she thinks it should be a higher number. I was kind of happy with 3,000 because that seemed like, you know, a pretty good sized house. But
I went through and tested all of the what I thought would be the scale controlling parameters or devices in the zoning. So I wouldn't mind just running through all of those at the same time, Kathleen, if you don't mind.
Okay. The second one is just sort of the houses have to be built prior to January 1st, 1970. The idea behind this is to protect the existing housing stock that we have in town. Significantly, a lot of it is built before 1970. And that sort of was the date that that I had picked. The dwelling that is converted to for the use of 3 or more units, it has to be located on a lot of not less than 10,000 square feet. So we're not looking at jamming into a small lot, a bunch of units. So there's a limitation on the acreage that's required for anything more than 3 units or 3 or more units. We've also added in a language that says that for the first 3 units, you have to have, instead of 10,000 square feet, and any additional units require another 2,000 square feet. So as I said, it's a way to control the density, which is clearly a lot, a lot less dense than what's being proposed on Amer or on Brush Hill Road. I did in number 4, I did some changes that I sent to Tim late this afternoon, but we wanted to say that after the conversion, the existing dwelling, so let's think about Canton Ave as an example, the existing dwelling would stay and it would still have to look like a single family dwelling. You could do additions, you could do extra buildings in the back or whatever, but the idea is to preserve the structure that's on the site already. And then I've added some language which isn't in this particular draft to say that the design of the additional structures, if there were any, that would be approved by the planning board would be compatible with the design of the existing dwelling. So you wouldn't just jam it in. And I also added today a requirement that if you had 10 units or more, 15% of the units would have to be permanently affordable to households making 80% or less of area median income. The suggestion had been to sort of include an affordable housing component. There's a question of what size project would you then start to include that requirement? And I thought 10 units seemed fair. Anything less than that, I think it's hard to make the numbers work. Cheryl had made a suggestion to require that to prevent, extra large buildings that were massive, that we would put in a requirement that no structure containing more than 12 units and no more than 6 units should be served from a single building entrance. So you wouldn't be having these massive buildings. You'd have to break it up in some way. And I've added a requirement that the project would have to comply with the underlining setback rules of the district that it's in. And so going forward, the idea is that the project would come before the planning board, and the planning board would have to look to see and make sure that this design was, compatible with the neighborhood, the character of the neighborhood, that the historical structures and the historical landscape on the site were respected by the project. And that, as I said, the location, the facades, building materials, and everything else are compatible with the predominant architecture of the surrounding neighborhood. So we do have the ability in letter C to allow additional units, provided that there was a really superior, demonstration of a really superior design that was including public open space potentially, not just private, preservation of existing dwellings or other architecturally significant structures, preservation of significant trees and landscaping, preservation and protection of environmentally sensitive areas, use of net zero, LEED standards, et cetera, so that if a project really came forward with all these extra public benefits, that we would have the ability, if we wanted to allow perhaps a higher number of dwelling units. We shall seek written comments from the Conservation Commission, the Historic Commission and the Town of Milton's Affordable Housing Trust and any other municipal board that we felt or commission that we felt was appropriate to weigh in on this project. And then letter E goes into what the application should contain. And the application is going to have to show it's going to be a condominium. It's, independent dwelling unit intended for use by a single family, its own bath, toilet, facilities, kitchen, all that sort of stuff. The average square footage of the interior living space, I had it as 900 square feet. The suggestion has been to reduce that to 700 square feet, which makes sense to me. There would be at least one off-street automobile parking space for each unit. All the utilities would be underground, and all exterior lighting shall be dark sky compliant, going to Denny's comment on that project on Wolcott Road. We'd have to take a look at the fire escapes and outside staircases, for the building. You have to be located on the rear so that you're not affecting the view of the building from the street. And Cheryl's had added a suggestion that any new construction wouldn't have any of those outside fire escapes or outside stairways. We'd have to take a look at the condominium documents, and we'd have to see a detailed landscaping plan, which would include existing and proposed grading, because clearly that's been an issue with the last few plans that we've looked at. Existing trees to remain, existing trees to be removed, as well as all the proposed new landscaping. The unit plans we'd have to see. We'd have to see the assessor's plan and all the land that's within a 300-foot radius of the site. Building elevations would have to be shown so that we know how that's going to look like from the street. And anything else like photographs or plans or existing conditions that we think are deemed reasonably necessary for our decision. You wouldn't be able to build a new building, let's say, or a new structure on the site unless the planning board is determined that the new building and structure provides a substantial public and financial benefit in protecting and enabling the restoration and preservation of the existing building. So if you think about, something like the Eustis Estate, for example, or something, you have this beautiful house that's going to cost a fortune to restore it, to convert it, to set it up, and that allowing additional structures sort of helps fund the necessary expenses of saving the building that we'd like to see saved. And so that would also include, the restoration of any historic landscaping, which is like the property on Blue Hill Ave. And that the new design of the new building and its structures fits in with the site, it fits in with the neighborhood. It doesn't create any adverse impacts on the existing building. And then the uses of the new building are consistent with the existing one and also with the neighborhood. We have to have a public hearing. And then on the findings that we have to find, we have to decide that, yes, any enlargement of the existing building is compatible with the architecture, that appropriate provisions have been made for the preservation and restoration of significant architectural, historical, and landscaping features. And that would be something that we'd be reading in the master deed and the declaration of trust as to what the condominium can do and not do. The design is consistent with the condominium and is compatible with the character of the neighborhood. The design makes adequate provision for open space for the residences of the project. The provision of master deed and bylaws will ensure the preservation and maintenance of the existing structure, and that the parking and driveway access is adequate. Once the permit would be issued, any change would have to come back to the planning board. And because you might have to, unfortunately have to modify the master deed and all that sort of thing as well. If the permit expires after 2 years, which is similar to everything else we've got here in town, if you don't act on it. We would require a certificate from an attorney representing the developer that the condominium has been validly and legally created under General Laws 183A. And that's about it. And otherwise, the condominium conversion is subject to all the other provisions that are already in the bylaw. So we already have a height limitation. We already have those sort of general provisions in our bylaw, and those are all still going to apply. They don't get waived by this special permit. And that's an unbelievably fast and probably not very concise explanation.
Oh, I thought it was
Kathleen,
great.
Kathleen, I apologize. I didn't see your updated draft.
Don't worry about it.
I was kind of in a flurry at the end of the day, but maybe email it to me again and I'll make sure it gets out to everybody.
I was on a Zoom call for the the New England Planners Association today. So
Oh, I was on that call as well, Kathleen. I thought you did a marvelous job.
thank you very much.
So Cheryl had a series of comments. I wonder if Cheryl, you want to walk through your test fit?
Sure. And while I guess maybe the spreadsheet first, Tim. And while Tim's bringing that up, I just wanted to go back and say, because when I was looking at these, I was thinking about, what our original purpose was in looking at this bylaw. And one of the things that we talked about was that we really want to have an alternative to tearing down a historic structure that might be functionally obsolete because of the size that the historic structure is, or maybe other aspects of it. And to give an alternative to that tear down so that we're not looking at a small subdivision alternative, which is really the only alternative besides a 40B that we have right now. So something besides the small subdivision and besides the 40B. And so for some sites, it might make sense to just convert the condo, and maybe the site isn't large enough to take new construction. But in some cases, so particularly for the alternative to 40B for, let's say, 648 Canton Ave or 582 Blue Hill Ave, how much is a reasonable amount of new construction that could be supported on the site, so that what we're getting in return is not only the preservation of the historic house and perhaps gardens as at 582 Blue Hill Ave, but also affordable housing. So that's our public benefit, is that we're making a contribution to our subsidized housing inventory. And so when I decided, what I had agreed to do was to look at this from the point of view of test fit, which is what I've been doing a fair amount for us. But so one of the things in looking at the two criteria that control in the draft, how many units that you could build, there's a criteria based on the size of the lot. And so that's section B3. And that's where it says that you can convert a dwelling up to 3 units or more if you have 10,000 square feet of land for the first 3 units and 2,000 square feet of land for every additional one. And so what that does is, and then I compared that to the other criteria, which is in section F1. And that's that you could build new construction, but that new construction would not exceed 50% of the gross floor area of all the units. So what that says to me is that you could build the same square footage in new construction that you have in the existing construction. And so when I looked at some sites, so Allison and Tim provided me with 4 sites to look at. And they're in each of our residential zoning districts, and they're up on the screen there. So if we tick the first one, which is in a C district, and it's the smallest lot of 12,502 square feet, and the criteria, well, we'll come to this, and I'll come back to this, the year built criteria. But if we look at this and we said, okay, based on this lot size only, and not the other provision F1, then this lot could have 4 units on it, because it would be the first 10,000 square feet could be 3 units in the existing. And then for the extra 2,000 square feet, those 2,500 here, you could have 1 more unit. But if you did the calculation based on, so you have now on this one, a lot that is 3,007, or a home that's 3,720 square foot on a lot that's 12,502. You also have in 322 Hillside Ave a home that's not much bigger, but it's on a much larger piece of land. And so what you can accomplish there in the first case if calculation, it would be very many units. So the controlling thing here would be the size of the existing structure. And so you could build 8 units on that. But then if we look at the ones in between, and you say, well, there's a larger home, the largest home of these 4 is 6,000 square feet. And it's on just on our, what we would call an acre, which is actually just under an acre, the 40,990. And if you do it by that 10,000 square feet in the total lot, you could come up with 18 units. But if you did it by basically the F1 calculation of being able to build new equal to the size of the existing, you could actually get 12 units on there. And you would be allowed only 9 units by that same calculation on the 1238 Canton Ave example, which is a much larger lot, almost 2.5 times the size. So that led me to think that if we're looking at this as an alternative to 40B, maybe that's not going to give us enough units. If we're looking at it as an alternative to a subdivision, then perhaps it would. So I wanted to test these out, to test out a fit on graphically, scale-wise, to see how it would fit on these. So I asked Tim and Allison to ask the GIS to produce some maps for me to test those out. And now we have those.
Thanks so much for doing this, because I wouldn't have been able to figure that out.
Cheryl, which one do you want me to open first?
Okay, why don't we start with Cary Ave? Well,
do you want me to do the context one or the regular one?
Let's do the regular one and then context each one. Well, this is the way, you know, I really spent, as I said, I've been doing a fair amount of this. I did a lot of these test fits for Milton Village to test out what we had in the zoning. And I think it's just, it happens to be what my professional skill set is. So I'm happy to apply it where I can. But so we look at this one, the red and sort of purple is the boundary of this site. So it's 100 feet by 126 feet. You can see the existing home in the middle, and the orange line are the setback lines. And the driveway, excuse me, is towards the top, and it's sort of outlined in purple. And so if you look at this, you say, okay, if you're going to stay within the setbacks, there's not really too much additional room to build on this site, right? So, I mean, maybe you would be able to do somewhat of an addition into the lower right corner of that home, or maybe something over the garage. But otherwise, you're really not going to have much room to build on this, just from what fits on the site perspective, right? So Tim, if you can just show now this in context. And because each one of these sites I wanted to take a look at, because some of them are larger in size than what the zoning requires. In fact, this one is. Because in a C district, the minimum lot size is 7,500 square feet. So this one's, you know, quite a bit above that. But looking at the construction of this house and the size of this house on this lot, this wouldn't be a good candidate for any kind of new construction with this, but it might be a candidate for converting the existing structure into condominiums, for example. Okay, so Tim, now let's look at 75 Canton. These are kind of big files, so. Okay, so this is the existing home in the middle. It's set back from the front yard, set back quite a bit. So it doesn't have a lot, and it has a driveway coming all the way around to the back. So it doesn't really, again, the parcel boundaries are sort of the red orange. The orange within that are the setback. And this footprint here is something that I know could fit 9 units in, and I just did this. It doesn't have to be 9 units. It's a 3,730 square foot footprint, but I did this as a test because by some calculation, like the calculation that this came up with is 12 units or 18 units. And maybe here you could do 12 if you could do 3 in the existing and 9 in the new. So I was trying to hit one of the numbers just to see what the fit might be. All right, so based on these control criteria that's in the draft, how does it work on the ground, if you will? So then,
What's the acreage of that lot?
This was about 1 acre.
It's 1 acre, and you're talking about up to 18 units?
I'm just attesting. I'm not necessarily recommending this, Danny. I'm just showing the calculation, because this is a big home and it's on 1 acre. By this calculation, we could get 12 units based on this draft of the zoning, right? By numbers, right? So what I did was a test, a physical test rather than the calculation test. So whether the planning board would decide in the future that this was a good, application would be subject to discussion. But this is just to see if it would fit, right? And it shows what 9 spaces would look like, right? So this is turnaround space or access driveway space to 9 spaces that would come in off of this driveway. Now, Tim, can you show and it's within the setbacks, right? So now the one that shows the context. So you can see here that this lot has lots to the north of it, or to the top of this sheet, that, might have, they're smaller lots for sure, right? Because this is in a B district. And so the requirement in a B district is what, 20,000 square feet, Tim? I can look it up.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I should have had it written down. So again, this is twice as big a lot for that's required in the district. And so you can see many of the homes or many of the lots in this district are smaller than this particular lot. So maybe what we're looking at is, we're not necessarily thinking about what district it's in, except that the housing pattern that's around these homes, right? So if you have a housing pattern around these homes that is denser than what the particular example or particular lot is, then maybe it can absorb some additional units. All right, now let's go to the 1238 Canton Ave. Canton Ave is picked on a lot here. And this site is 104,740 square feet, or just under 2.5 acres. It happens to have boundary 3 sides on roads, which is probably fairly unusual, and a house right in the middle. So by calculation, this, while being nearly 2.5 times the size of the lot that we just looked at, by calculation that we have in this draft, would only be 9 units instead of 12 that the prior one had. And it has to do with the size of the existing house rather than the size of the lot. And so here, I decided to plug in 2 structures just to see about the fit. So here, this is actually 21. And these numbers, I'll tie back to some of the other things how I arrived at some of these numbers. But in this, you can see that you could access these two new structures from separate streets, and that you could address all of the, this is the same size footprint, little different configuration as the one that we just looked at. But you could fit this, these on this site. And in this case, if you had 9 units in each building and 3 in the existing, you'd have 21 units on 104,000 square feet and change. And that would be about 5,000 square feet of lot per every unit. And Tim, can you go now to the context? Okay, so this lot is in an A district, and an A district minimum lot size is 40,000 square feet. So again, if you look across the street, you know, the lot sizes in the single families across the street are probably in that 40,000 square foot range. So here you have something where this could be subdivided in ways as a subdivision, but also in ways as an alternative to that subdivision where you keep the house in the middle, or as an alternative to 40B. You could add 2 structures here. Now, the last one is the 322 Hillside.
I'm sorry, Cheryl, could I ask if you know off the top of your head, how much acreage was that last site and what was the maximum?
It was 2.4 acres, the last one.
Mm-hmm.
And if you did it by the calculation that controls, which is the size of the house, then it would be 9 units. Again, by size of the house, the one on upper or the other end of Canton Ave towards Milton Village, because that's a smaller lot but a larger house, that would have allowed 12 by that calculation. So this is just some reason why I'm going to suggest we think about a different way to calculate it and how many units we're allowing. So the hillside is the largest lot, and that's in the AA district, and it's 4.2 acres. But it also has the same size house as the one that we first saw, which is on Cary Ave. So by calculation, in that formula, you would be allowed 8 units here on a nearly 4.2 acre site. And let's remember that 582 Blue Hill Avenue is about a 4 acre site, and 648 Canton Avenue is just under 5 acres. So here, again, I took that same footprint and I said that could be 9 units, and I put 4 of these here. And that existing house would remain a single family. And I just showed parking. This is not for design, folks. This is just to give us an idea of what these footprints are and what kind of parking footprints this would take up. And so Tim and you can see there's a lot of this which is undisturbed here still. If you zoom out or go to the next one, which is the context one, which is zoomed out to pick up some of what's around there. And again, this lot, you know, is larger than some of the lots that are adjacent to it and across the street from it, which have large single family homes on it. And that's just again, these are just to kind of get a sense of the development pattern around these example test sites. What I looked at with this was, okay, I felt as if the having the 10,000 square feet for 3 units and 2,000 square feet wasn't meaningful because there wasn't any of these that was being controlled by that. And that therefore, the only one that was going to control how many units was based on the size of the existing house. And that didn't seem fair to me, that it would not somehow be tied to the lot size. Mm-hmm. So I began to think, what can we do to shift that, right? So I said, well, why don't we tie it to the lot size and not the house size? And so that's why my test fits were saying, testing out if you did 5,000 square feet of lot area for every unit. And we can see whether we think, based on what you saw, whether that's a good number or not. But it is something, one way that we could look at doing it rather than that criteria that we've got in the zoning right now. Then I began to think, okay, what are the other criteria that's in here? And I went back and I looked at the analysis that the Historical Commission had done and provided to us over a year ago in September. And I found, so Tim's going to pull that up, great. And when we were talking to them about, you know, what kind of homes that might this address, this kind of condo conversion when we were first looking at it, and they put this together and they said, okay, so they did it by size of lot and by size of home. And if you took all of these, which is 3,000 square feet and below, and 1 acre and above, and you have a total of 153. But when I was looking at those, and I was thinking that perhaps that's going to 1970 to 1930, there's a big difference. So I looked at the housing production plan, and there's a chart that said that's fully 75% of Milton's housing stock was built by 1960. So I thought this bylaw could apply to way too many houses and might provide us with way too many redevelopments if we use 1970 as our year. So I went back and I said, well, maybe it's 1930, or maybe it's even something different than that. But if we look at the test samples that we have, the test samples, the homes were built in 1928, 1820, 1788, and 1930. We know 582 Blue Hill Ave was built around 1920s, I believe. Oh, it's actually right here, 1925. And that's 648 Canton Ave was built in 1898. So then, so it seemed to me that that's another way to think about limiting its application, is to push it back at least until 1930. Then, then the next question really is, should we have a lot minimum? And so that, you know, where we look at some of those, that smaller lot, that 12,500 square foot lot, a lot minimum maybe for doing any new construction, so that you could convert something, but maybe you wouldn't be allowed to do something new unless you had maybe an acre or maybe 2 acres. So I just kind of throw that out for consideration. And before, and then, you know, some of the other things that we've seen, which is some of the other recommendations, was that, you know, the scale of these buildings, I actually think 3 stories and 35 feet rather than an underlying zoning of 2.5 and 35, because I think that could be more of an attractive alternative to the 40Bs. If you can get 3 stories in, and your scale and height, I know you can do it in that. And
I've got 3 stories here, so yeah.
And there are 3 stories, like the Canton Ave one, I think it was 75 Canton Ave is 3 stories, and quite beautiful, right? So then in thinking about these monstrosities, which thanks Kathleen, you picked up on, which is having no more than a certain number of units in a structure, and having a limit to the length of the building, and having multiple entrances. Those are all things that I think could help prevent something, you know, from being totally out of scale. So I wanted to show, and there's some other, you know, things that I'm suggesting that you've picked up on, Kathleen, and we can go into those in more detail. But I do want to show the same kind of analysis that I did with this 5,000 square feet per acre. 5,000 square feet per unit for 648 Canton Ave and 582 Blue Hill Ave. So can you go?
Am I bringing up the diagram?
Yep, and you're going to go first to the existing. Okay, so this is the model you may recall from our analysis that I did when these were first before us for the project eligibility letters.
Yeah, so that's Blue Hill Avenue on the top and Meeting House Lane over on the left-hand lower left-hand corner. So you're looking at the back of the existing building. The gardens are off to the left.
Right.
It's that accessory building.
Right. So now, Tim, can you go to the 40B application? Now, these 40Bs are the originals. I haven't yet modeled their revised, but I'm planning to. So this is what they proposed when they first applied, and those are those retaining walls we talked about and the scale of building. So I think they were at what, 120 units in their initial application here. Tim, can you go to the next one, which is the test? So this would be if you did 5,000 square feet per unit and you did 3 buildings that had 9 units, that would give you 27. And that gives you 8 units to put in the existing garage structure and the existing home. And you keep the gardens, existing home, and the whole front appearance. And you can break down the scale of those structures. This is just an initial stab at where you would do it. This is a massing that I had done for something else. So it's not something I designed specifically for these analyses, but it's just to give an idea of scale, you know, so as an alternative. So we're, you know, we'd be looking at if we used that 5,000 square feet on a per unit based on the lot, that this would be how much volume would be allowed to be built on that site. Is that an attractive is that an attractive alternative to a subdivision or an attractive alternative to a 40B? What, Tim?
I was just going to say, take the orange line to Green Street if you want to see that building.
No, it's one I'm working on for Brighton though. But anyway, it just happens to be that you can do a 9 unit, like I put in my notes, you can do a 3-story building and 3 units per floor in 35 feet with 1 stair and very little common area and no elevator, because your first floor units can be accessible units and then you don't need the elevator to go up the other 2 floors. So what it means, it's a very compact footprint, and has the cost structure, because the way you can build these, you don't have that podium type of expensive construction with the parking. This would have to have surface parking, and that would have to be.
I know, but Cheryl, there's no retaining walls. What's the point?
But I just think, you know, if we said, okay, if we had to find places where we can add units that could get us to our affordability, this is the kind of test we're going to have to look at. You know, we're going to have a conversation about what we think we can absorb. And there may be other sites that can do this that are town owned, but, you know, having some discussions with the developers of these 40Bs, if we can get someplace with them, I don't know, but if we can at least decide how much might be a reasonable alternative, we can possibly have the conversation. Now, Tim, can you go to the Canton Ave ones as well? So that's the existing, Canton Ave is on the left side. And that access is you kind of see the parking layout of the proposed 40B mistakenly there, but that's just the existing. And the blue is that encroaches into this or goes into this parcel is the 100-foot boundary of the wetland. And then Winter Valley is towards the middle in there, and Milton Hospital is towards the top. Okay, Tim. That's the original 40B application with the big parking lot down towards Canton Ave and the so-called 4-story structure. And then Tim's, and because this lot's a little bit bigger, I calculated that to come out to 40 units. And so 4 structures of 9 units and then converting of the existing house into 4 units. And that would get you 40 units there. So these, because of the configurations, there might be a different, again, you would have to design these to fit these sites. But the idea is, this was just taking something from something else and of the right kind of scale and putting it in. But I think it can begin to show how you can use a formula, a mathematical formula, and you can test it on some of these sites like we did here to help us figure out what's the appropriate tool here for this zoning. And so I open it up from there. That was my analysis.
Well, thank you so much. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that was really, really helpful. So Cheryl, do you want to talk through, I see a list of suggested changes. A lot of these you went through, the 4,000 versus the 3,000 and 1930 or earlier versus 1970. Trying to see if there's anything in here that you haven't already touched on.
Yeah, so let me see. I think
design issues.
Yeah, there were, I had wanted to add, and if you wanted to maybe pull back up the draft of the zoning. In F2, public benefit, I guess I didn't put this in my notes, but what I did mention was the public benefit of affordable housing. But there's also in terms of preserving a historic landscape. Because
I did add that. I've added
okay,
that.
you get that? Okay.
Yep.
Because that goes towards 582, and,
Yep.
and it's basically what we did for Wilcott Woods too. So historic landscape. And then I had suggested that putting the affordability at 15% when there's at least 6 units. So Kathleen changed that to 10. Did you keep it at 15 or did you drop that from 15?
I moved it into the beginning under B.
Okay, but did you do it as a requirement of 15%?
15% if you have 10 units or more.
Yeah, and the reason I did 15% is that I felt like it needed to be more than what we're doing for our baseline zoning, I think of 10 to 12% that we've done.
Yeah, so I said 15.
Right. I just want to point it out
at 10 units.
Yeah, I just want to point out to everybody else, Kathleen, in terms of what my thinking was, but I'm okay if you all think 10. We have made it 6, like for some things, I think, but.
So I think it was, we used 6 for the
Brook Road.
The Brook Road overlay, but I don't know if that's a shining example of success. So I tend to lean towards the 10 because I do think we want to make this as an attractive option.
Right.
I do think there's some feasibility questions when you get down to the smaller unit counts. But
Yeah,
I do think 50% is really good though.
I think
Yeah,
10.
I raised it to, I said 10 units because we really think it's important to save the house.
Right.
And that structure could require a lot of money. It's not brand new construction, which has lower costs. And so, because of the retrofitting of an existing dwelling, I thought the numbers really wouldn't work if it had to be, it's 6 units. I thought it works at 10, I think.
And I'm fine with 10. That's common in Boston is 10, I think. And it's probably, and I know they do a lot of financial analysis on it. One thing that I just had made a note about making a requirement for open space. It goes to what people were saying earlier about having usable open space. And
I added into, it's not in the draft that you're looking at, but I did add in a provision for that the plans had to show open space. I'm trying to see where I added that in.
I just want to make a comment about both the multiple entrances and the open space. I'm finding like the American Institute of Architects has a bulletin out about COVID design thinking relative to COVID-19, and they have one for multifamily housing, and we're talking about the importance of private outdoor space as well as public outdoor space, and the multiple entrances. So multiple entrances, meaning you're lessening the sort of the touch points. So it's sort of, people can, in a multifamily, like let's say the 40Bs, where it's, one or two elevators and two stairs and long corridors. And then, just having some access to open space so people can get out is, makes sense anyway. I have a client also who's told me that their project in Jamaica Plain, so hopping on that orange line, Tim, that they have a balcony or outdoor space for every unit, and that's significant to their buyers right now, because that if they're looking at staying in the city and buying a condominium, having the access to the outdoor space is critical to them right now.
I added it to the findings that the planning board has to find that the design makes adequate provision for open space for the residents of the project. So,
all right. So I guess maybe we should think about whether we add more than that to that, but.
Okay. Looking at the time, I'm just sort of.
Yep. And just looking, so I think you said did you include what I had suggested with that no structure contain more than 9 to 12 units? I'm kind of thinking 9 units is the better of those after my analysis. I wrote this before the physical fit analysis. And then, if you had 9 units and you had an entrance for every 6, you'd be required to have 2. So, I mean, maybe we could think about that, but.
I did on no units shall contain more than, I put 12, and no more than 6 units shall be served from a single building entrance. So you want to have that 9 units?
Well, based on these footprints that I showed you, where I said that's 9, that seems a reasonable footprint to me. So if you get bigger than that, I don't know, people have any thoughts about that? I would go 9. And then I guess with 9, that kind of leaves it kind of an odd number for the number of entrances.
Yeah. So what do you want?
I'm sorry, Cheryl. What was the question? I lost my focus.
How many? Setting a maximum.
I know.
Number.
I'm looking at the watch. I'm looking at my watch. Danny.
No, Kathleen, I can see you're moving it, but it's just it's a lot to take in. I'm really fascinated. I have a lot of questions. Just by 10 o'clock.
Well, there's no way this is something that's done in one discussion. So I just want to point out, and everyone can think about and come back to it next when we talk about this again, is, I had put in a provision or suggested a provision that we limit the number of units per
in letter
structure.
B number 7 when you get the new version. Well, we letter B number 7.
So how many units per structure?
It's like a bingo card.
Oh, how many units per structure? How many?
Yep.
Okay.
Then the length of it, and then I put some criteria. So, so that I think we've covered. I think April, the bulk of it.
Yeah. So I mean, I just want to provide a little bit of feedback. I think that this is excellent. I think that the fact that this is a special, it does go through the process. There's a lot of discretion for the planning board, the way that it's written, and additional suggestions by Cheryl. I think it touches on all the major themes that we've not only expressed concern about with the 40B projects, but also interest in when we're reviewing every project. And I think this is a very thoughtful approach. I would ask if it's something you guys are willing to do, would you mind putting your heads together on a revised draft between now and the next meeting? And then we can kind of circle back on what you guys think the best outcomes are of this. I mean, I think Cheryl really pointed out a lot of great things that we wouldn't normally have the benefit of. So thank you for doing that. And I wonder if maybe you and Kathleen can kind of talk over some of these things and come back with a recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, I put in a lot. I looked at Cheryl's comments and I put in a lot of that. She hasn't seen that because I only sent it to Tim. I
did hear a lot of them when you were
I'll send
discussing.
it back to Cheryl, and then we can fine tune it for the next time.
So I think this is great. The only other thing I'm going to suggest is I spoke with the member of the select board who suggested that perhaps we run a draft when we have a little bit more comfort level about it, maybe after our next discussion, by some of the 40B developers to see if this is something that would be of interest to them. I mean, I definitely don't want to get the members of the public hopes up, because I think this is just still an idea and it hasn't gone to town meeting yet. So it's not really something we can rest our hat on, but I do know that the select board is interested in this as a potential alternative to some of these 40B projects. My other thought is that once we get a draft that we talk about again, it might make sense for us to just float it by a bunch of different developers, because it would be helpful to know what they think. I mean, at our last meeting, Kyle, is it Hamish? 227 Pleasant said, anything you need from me, I grew up in this, or I live in this town, I'd like to see more of this and less of the 40B proposals too. So if I can provide feedback, I think we should take them up on it. I mean, it would be interesting to know from the developer's perspective, some of these things relative to cost or whatever. Is there something in here that would be a deal breaker for them to consider this? And I just think it would help us as we prepare potentially to bring something like this forward. So those are my only suggestions. I think both of you have done a phenomenal job. There's a lot of stuff in here that I really, really like, and I won't bore everybody with the details, but I appreciate your efforts. Thank you. I don't know if Denny or Rich have anything to add, but if not, I'm going to suggest we just go right to 8 Parkwood Drive and we kick the can once again on the housing production plan, which is too bad, because I really am looking forward to that discussion. But given the hour, I know Tim needs some feedback from us on 8 Parkwood Drive. And then
just to say on the housing plan that, once I get this done, I'm going to start a draft of the accessory unit one, which is on the housing plan. And so I'll send along a draft on that.
Great. I'm really excited about that. Thank you. So Tim, you want to just give us a quick run?
Just had a question. How much longer are you planning? Just because in the interest of time, I can't go too much longer.
Tim, do you need something from us on 8 Parkwood Drive tonight?
If I can get 5 minutes to just sort of lay out the issue, and then we can kind of figure out a next step, maybe offline or punt it to the next agenda. So I don't need a ton of time on this. Suffice it to say that a couple meetings ago, we discussed the kind of restitution plan for the trees that were taken down at 8 Parkwood Drive, which is a scenic road issue, so it falls to the planning board. Carol Stocker, who lives in the neighborhood, had given a little bit of the history and a little bit of how her group has been stewarding that land. I have had a conversation with Mr. Keneally, who is the original developer, who had taken down the trees. He gave me a little bit of clarity as to what his understanding of the term of that sort of declining surety bond was. And I think, we all came to an agreement that the bond was meant to run from May of 2018 to May of 2021, which I think is reflected more or less in the minutes, and just made sense to me based on my knowledge of the project. And I think I conveyed that to Carol, and she she agreed. If you remember, she had kind of requested an extension of that bond term, to which Mr. Keneally absolutely refused. I don't. There may be some bad blood there, but
you could suggest to Mr. Keneally that he could pay the water bill.
So, give me a minute.
I'm just getting to the point. Looking at the one.
Well, the first point is that Carol is working with our friends at Thayer Nursery to procure some mulch and some other supplies, and additional potential replacement plantings that she feels would, as a kind of last burst of support for this land, after the declining bond expires. To really give it the best kind of path forward. So if folks want to take another minute, or not minute, but week or two to look through that proposal, I'd like to at least have on the record that the planning board thinks that this is an okay thing for Carol and her group to go through with. At which point we can figure out cash one of those checks. You may recall we've got 3 $4,000 checks. That's the form that the declining surety bond takes. So if you've
You
all
want
had a
to
chance,
find out first whether those checks will be honored before you
so
spend it.
I have talked to the treasurer. He got in touch with the bank. They are cashier's checks that have a longer lifespan. So I think at the very least, 2 of those checks are still good. So not a problem there. It's just now a matter of kind of, what account do they go in, and then who pulls from that account. It's just a little bit of accounting stuff that I need to work with. So that's step 1. And then step 2 is I had forwarded you an email from Chase Berkeley, the director of the DPW. The irrigation system, my understanding is that the irrigation system was meant to be separately metered. It was not separately metered. And so that water that's been irrigating that land has been off of the water meter of the house. And so that's, I think, technically the homeowner's bill right now, although that owner has nothing to do with any of this. And so there's a question as to, who pays that bill, how does it get paid, and whatnot. I'm not sure exactly what the planning board's role in that would be, although if anyone has any ideas, it would be great. Denny?
Yeah, I remember at the time that was a big topic of discussion, and there was a lot of that was supposed to be paid for by Keneally. So I mean, it just was, and that's why they had different meters, and there was a lot of talk, and there was a lot of concern about it. And I just wanted to. I read through all your documents. I wanted to say, I'm in full support of, following Carol's suggested plan of action with the Thayer Nursery. Forget what the word is, like estimate or the documents that you sent look fine to me. I would just do it. We spend so much time on this as a board. I want to move on to, I just want to get it done and move on. But
No, I agree. I'm in full support of the proposal too.
Yeah.
Water bill is a separate issue. I don't even know how to address that. And I don't know if we need council to advise on whether or not we can. But I definitely agree with the replanting proposal.
Well, I mean, I took a look at the deed for the people's house, and it, they get the property. It doesn't say anything in there about an irrigation system that they're required to pay for. It just says it's subject to a tree easement shown on the plan, which is a piece of junk. So, I don't know what, it's, if it's tied into their irrigation system, it's going to be a lien on their house, whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me, I'll continue to consult with Chase about this, and I may ask town council for advice as just how to approach it. It's a pretty, my landlord pays my water bill, so I don't know how much water costs. It seems like a lot of money. I don't know.
Well, it hasn't been paid for like a couple of years.
And it's a big, big area, and they were
Yeah.
feeding a lot of things in some dry summers and stuff for,
So-
it can add up in the summer.
Can some of that expired check money go towards that water bill?
That's
Well,
what I would think.
I think that becomes the question, which is, technically there is a quantity of money that would cover it that, we have in our possession. I would want to, again, talk to town council about kind of how best to proceed here. So let me get some of that advice and then report back. But if you guys, if you all want to take a vote on Carol's plan, we can at least try to move forward on that.
All right, let's do that. Denny, you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I move to support and process the Hillside Neighborhood Association's plan as drawn out in the paperwork that she gave to Tim Chewinski.
For 8 Parkwood Drive.
For 8 Parkwood Drive, thank you.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Well, then let's do a roll call vote. Cheryl Tagayas?
Yes.
Kathleen O'Donnell?
Yes.
Denny Swenson?
Yes.
Rich Beeler?
Oh, he's on mute. Okay.
Sorry, yes. Double mute there.
April Anderson, yes. So we at least got that out of the way. Okay. So with that, I think we should adjourn the meeting. I would ask a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
April, just, sorry, one last thing. Can the next meeting, if we're going to talk about the condo conversion, put it towards the end of the agenda, just because of my conflict? Thank you.
Yes, oh, definitely, yeah. Yep.
But
And this
not
was a
too
very
late,
good
'cause I
meeting.
don't want to, not too late, 'cause I don't want to get sleepy again. Because it's such an important topic. I was like, we're doing all these things. It's a lot to absorb.
Somebody was
so.
telling me on the Zoom call that I was on this afternoon that he was on another one and somebody fell asleep.
Oh, gosh.
You know,
Oh my
full
God.
full on.
Well, I'm going to request to be on the agenda first on this other planning board meeting, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, Denny, this was a lot of discussion and kind of a lot of back and forth and looking at the test fits. I think the next meeting might be a little more cut and dry. If we have something recommended by, the two ladies here that we have the good fortune of working with, then we can kind of just talk through the details of what sticks out to us, and we'll have that in advance. So I think it might be a little more expeditious, the next discussion, or less in theory. Okay, so motion to adjourn.
Yes. I'm so moved.
Second.
Anyone second?
Kathleen.
Any discussion? I don't hear any. Okay, let's take a roll call vote. Kathleen O'Donnell. Jenny Swenson.
Yes.
Wheeler.
Yes.
Cheryl Tagayas.
Yes.
April Anderson. Thank you so much. This was a very good meeting.